Hello, this is Olga, and while Ray is already dreaming beside me, I am here to guide you to sleep. Our human writer crafted this story with great care to help you relax completely. So close your eyes, let go of the day, and let's begin. The threshold of velvet blue. The transition from the waking world to the realm of dreams often happens in the blink of an eye, a sudden shift that the mind barely registers. But tonight, for Leo, the change was slow, deliberate, and exquisitely gentle. He lay in his bed, the familiar weight of the duvet pressing softly against his chest, a comforting heaviness that seemed to anchor him to the safety of his room. The house was settling into its nightly rhythm, a quiet symphony of stillness. The street lamp outside the window cast a slanted rectangle of pale amber light across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, suspended stars. Leo watched them drift, up and down, swirling in currents of air too subtle to be felt, simply existing in the quiet warmth of the evening. His eyelids felt heavy, deliciously so, as if they were being pulled down by gentle, invisible fingers. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of clean cotton and the faint, lingering aroma of lavender from the laundry. And as he exhaled, he felt the muscles in his shoulders release their tension. The knot of energy that had carried him through the day unspooled, leaving behind a sensation of melting, as though he were sinking deeper into the mattress, becoming one with the softness that held him. It was then that the room began to change. It did not shift with a jolt or a sudden movement. Instead, it softened. The corners of the room, usually sharp and defined by shadows, began to blur, their edges dissolving into a fine, misty haze. The amber light on the floor widened, spreading like spilt honey, losing its rectangular shape and becoming a warm, golden glow that permeated the air. The ceiling, which Leo had looked at 1,000 times, began to lift. It drifted upwards, higher and higher, the white plaster fading into a deep, translucent gray, then a rich, twilight blue, and finally, a vast, endless indigo. The walls didn't fall away. They simply expanded, stepping back until they were miles away, transforming from solid barriers into curtains of night sky. Leo realized, with a calm acceptance that felt entirely natural, that he was no longer lying on a bed inside a house. The mattress beneath him had become a cloud of pure, supportive energy, a cushion of air that held him perfectly suspended. He was floating. He looked down at his body. He was still wearing his comfortable pajamas, the fabric soft against his skin, but there was a subtle change. A faint, pearlescent glow seemed to radiate from him, a soft outline of light that separated him from the deepening blue around him. He extended a hand, watching his fingers move through the space. The air here was not empty. It had a texture. It felt like moving his hand through cool, silk water, yet he was perfectly dry. It was a fluid atmosphere, rich and supporting, offering a gentle resistance that made every movement feel graceful and slow. Leo took another breath. He had read that there was no air in space, that it was a cold vacuum where life could not exist. But this was not that kind of space. This was a secret cosmos, a hidden layer of the universe reserved for dreamers and travelers of the quiet. The air he inhaled was sweeter than any mountain breeze. It tasted of ozone and vanilla, of night-blooming jasmine and the clean, metallic scent of rain on hot stones. It filled his lungs with a revitalizing, cool energy, making his chest expand with a sense of boundless freedom. He could breathe here, easier and deeper than he ever had on Earth. With every inhale, he felt lighter, With every exhale, he released the last remnants of gravity. He turned his body slowly, a motion that required no effort, merely a thought. He was drifting in a sea of stars. They were everywhere. Above him, below him, to every side, the universe was a tapestry of light. But these were not the distant, cold pinpricks of light he was used to seeing from his backyard. Here, the stars were close. They were large, luminous spheres of gentle fire, hanging in the void like lanterns in a vast, dark garden. Some were the color of warm candlelight, flickering with a steady, reassuring pulse. Others were cool diamonds, sharp and brilliant, casting long, slender beams of silver through the gloom. There were stars of deep, burning ruby and others of soft, pastel violet. They didn't blind him. Their light was filtered, soft on the eyes, like the glow of a lamp through a paper shade. Leo felt a connection to them, a sense that they were aware of his presence, watching him with a silent, ancient kindness. He began to swim. It was the only word that fit, though he didn't use his arms to pull himself forward. He simply leaned into the velvet darkness, and the universe carried him. He glided past a constellation that looked like a great, sleeping bear, the stars that formed its shape connected by faint, shimmering lines of stardust. He reached out as he passed, his fingertips grazing the edge of the constellation. The sensation was tingly and warm, like touching the static on an old television screen, but softer. The silence of this place was profound. It was not an empty silence, but a heavy, resonant stillness. It was the kind of silence that exists in a library after all the books have been closed, or in a forest after a heavy snowfall. Yet, underneath the silence, there was a sound. It was very low, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was the heartbeat of the cosmos, a slow, cello-like vibration that Leo could feel in his bones. It was a lullaby without words, a continuous, comforting drone that made his eyelids droop with relaxation. He drifted further, leaving the immediate vicinity of his arrival. As he moved, he looked back. Far below, suspended in the dark like a precious ornament, was the earth. From this distance, it was breathtakingly peaceful. It was a marble of swirled blue and white, glowing with a soft, internal light. He couldn't see the cities or the roads. He couldn't hear the noise or feel the rush of the world. All he saw was the clouds drifting lazily over the oceans, the patches of green and brown land resting under the cover of the atmosphere. It looked safe. It looked asleep. Leo felt a wave of love for that small, blue world, but he knew he didn't need to be there right now. He was safe here, held in the arms of the infinite. He turned his gaze back to the open expanse before him. The depth of the space was mesmerizing. The darkness wasn't flat, it had layers. It was a deep, rich, three-dimensional darkness, like looking into a deep pool of water. There were shades of charcoal, of midnight blue, of deep plum, all swirling together in a slow, hypnotic dance. Ahead of him, a nebula was unfurling like a giant flower. It was massive, spanning across his entire field of vision, a cloud of gas and dust illuminated from within by newborn stars. It was colored in shades of soft pink and apricot, with veins of gold running through it. As Leo approached it, the nebula seemed to welcome him. The mist of the nebula was thin and wispy, like fog on a morning river. He drifted into it, and the world around him turned a hazy, golden pink. The sensation of the nebula against his skin was different from the open space. It felt warmer, slightly more humid, like the air in a greenhouse. The golden dust clung to his pajamas and his hands, coating him in a fine layer of glitter. He watched as a small cluster of rocks, no bigger than apples, floated past him. They were tumbling in slow motion, turning over and over, catching the light of the nebula. They looked like rough gemstones, their surfaces faceted and gleaming. Leo realized that in this place there was no up or down. There was only here. There was only the present moment. The worries of tomorrow, the schedules, the expectations, they were all millions of miles away, left behind on the blue marble. Here, there was only the gentle drift, the beautiful lights, and the soothing rhythm of his own breath. He rolled onto his back, crossing his arms behind his head, and let himself coast. He watched the ceiling of the universe pass by. A comet, its tail a long, elegant brushstroke of ice and light, moved silently across the sky above him. It was moving slower than a cloud, taking its time to traverse the endless distance. Its tail was a gradient of color, shifting from bright white at the head to a deep, fading blue at the tip. Leo watched it for a long time, mesmerized by its slow, graceful journey. The temperature was perfect. It was the kind of temperature that made you forget you had a body. It wasn't hot, it wasn't cold. It was exactly neutral, perfectly attuned to his own internal warmth. It felt like being submerged in a bath that had been drawn to the exact degree of his skin. This comfort allowed his muscles to relax even further. His legs felt loose and heavy, his arms felt weightless. His neck, often stiff from looking at books or screens, felt long and fluid. As he floated through the pink mist of the nebula, he noticed that the light was changing again. The pink was fading into a soft, verdant green. He was entering a new region of space, a place where the gases glowed with the color of spring leaves and deep emeralds. The light here was soothing to his eyes, a restful, natural hue that reminded him of lying under a large oak tree with the sun filtering through the canopy. In this green expanse, he saw floating islands. They were not planets, but large, irregular chunks of rock drifting aimlessly. But these rocks were not barren. They were covered in thick velvet moss. In the low gravity, the moss grew in large, fluffy mounds, creating soft, green hills in the middle of the vacuum. Leo drifted toward one of the larger islands. It was the size of a small house, gently rotating in the starlight. He extended his legs and landed softly on the surface. There was no impact, just a gentle deceleration as his feet touched the moss. It was incredibly soft, deeper, and more plush than the finest carpet. He sank into it up to his ankles. It was warm, retaining the heat of the nearby stars. He decided to lie down. He curled up on the floating island of moss, his body molding into the greenery. Lying there, anchored to a small rock drifting through the cosmos, Leo felt a sense of absolute peace. He was a traveler on a raft of moss, sailing through a sea of emerald light. Above him, the stars continued their silent vigil. He watched a pair of twin stars, one blue and one orange, dancing around each other in a slow, gravitational waltz. They spun and spiraled, their lights blending and separating in a hypnotic rhythm. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the deep hum of the universe. It seemed to be louder here, reverberating through the rock he lay upon. It was a grounding sound, a vibration that told him he was part of something vast and eternal. He felt safe. He felt hidden away in a secret pocket of the sky where nothing could disturb him. He opened his eyes again, not wanting to miss the beauty around him. The green mist was thinning now, revealing a vista of deep, rich purple beyond. It was like looking into the heart of an amethyst. The colors of this place were food for his soul, nourishing him with their depth and vibrancy. He felt his mind clearing, the clutter of thoughts swept away by the sheer magnitude of the beauty before him. Leo pushed himself gently off the mossy island, resuming his drift. He moved slowly, lazily, like a swimmer treading water in a calm lagoon. He watched the island recede behind him, a green jewel tumbling into the purple dark. He was heading toward a cluster of lights that looked like fireflies. As he got closer, he saw that they were indeed tiny stars, miniature suns no larger than marbles, swarming together in a playful cloud. They drifted around him as he passed, their light tickling his skin with warmth. They were curious, these tiny stars bobbing and weaving around his hands, illuminating his face with soft, flickering pulses. He smiled, a slow, sleepy smile. He was the boy who swam among the stars, the explorer of the velvet night. The journey was long, he knew. There were endless galaxies to see, infinite nebulas to drift through, but there was no rush. Time didn't matter here. He had all the time in the world. He could drift for an eternity, bathed in starlight, breathing the sweet, cool air of the cosmos. He was exactly where he was meant to be, relaxed, weightless, free. And so, Leo continued his slow swim into the deepening night, his heart beating in slow, steady time with the pulse of the universe, ready to discover what lay beyond the veil of the purple mist, deeper into the comforting, endless embrace of the stars. The river of liquid light. The purple mist that had cradled Leo began to thin, dissolving like sugar in warm tea. As the violet haze receded, it revealed a clarity of space that was startling in its purity. If the previous sector of the cosmos had been a soft, velvet room, this new expanse was a vast, open cathedral of glass and silence. The darkness here was not opaque. It possessed a translucent quality, a deep, crystalline clarity that allowed Leo to see for what felt like light years in every direction. Leo drifted forward, his body relaxed and loose, carried by the residual momentum of his push from the mossy island. He felt a change in the atmosphere against his skin. The air, which had been warm and humid near the nebula, was now cool and crisp. It felt like the air on a mountaintop just before dawn, clean, bracing, and still. It was a refreshing coolness, one that soothed his forehead and made his senses feel sharp and awake, yet entirely calm. Ahead of him lay a magnificent sight, the crystal shoals. It was a vast field of asteroids, but they were unlike any rocks found on Earth. These floating giants were made of pure, transparent ice and diamond. They hung in the void like massive, suspended jewels, slowly rotating in the starlight. There were thousands of them, ranging in size from small pebbles to colossal mountains of glass, all drifting in a silent, synchronized dance. As Leo approached the nearest crystal asteroid, he extended his hand to touch it. The surface was smooth, flawlessly polished by the erosion of time and stardust. It felt cool under his fingertips, solid and grounding. He pushed gently against it, and the massive diamond slowly tipped, sending a ripple of reflected light cascading through its interior. Light did not simply pass through these asteroids, it lived inside them. The light from distant stars entered the crystals and was trapped, bouncing endlessly from facet to facet. Inside the ice, Leo could see trapped rainbows, prisms of spectral color that shifted and swirled with every slow rotation. There were veins of sapphire blue, flashes of sudden magenta, and deep, resonant pools of gold. It was like looking into a kaleidoscope that moved in slow motion. He navigated through this forest of glass with ease. There was no danger of collision. Everything moved with a majestic slowness. If he drifted too close to a crystal, a cushion of compressed air seemed to gently push him away, guiding him through the path of least resistance. He felt like a fish swimming through a coral reef made of diamonds. As he floated between two large, towering shards of ice, he heard a sound. It was the faintest of chimes, a delicate, high-pitched vibration that seemed to come from the crystals themselves. It wasn't a mechanical sound, but a resonant frequency, as if the asteroids were singing to one another across the void. The sound washed over him, vibrating in his chest, loosening the last bits of tension in his back. It was a healing sound, pure and clear, like the ringing of a silver bell underwater. Leo closed his eyes for a moment, letting the coolness of the crystal field wash over him. When he opened them again, he noticed a current. Throughout the shoals, weaving between the floating diamonds, was a stream. It wasn't water, but it flowed with the same liquid grace. It was a river of stardust, a thick, luminous band of silver and pearlescent particles flowing through the vacuum. The river was wide, a highway of light that stretched endlessly into the dark. It glowed with a soft, milky radiance, illuminating the faces of the crystal asteroids as it wound its way past them. Leo felt a gentle pull, a magnetic invitation to join the flow. He allowed himself to drift toward the edge of the stream. As he entered the river of stardust, the sensation was exquisite. The dust was not gritty. It felt like dry silk, like millions of tiny, soft spheres rolling over his skin. It tickled slightly, a pleasant, buzzing sensation that made his skin tingle with warmth. The current took hold of him, not with force, but with a firm, supportive embrace. He didn't need to swim anymore. The river had him. He turned onto his back, lying atop the stream of light. He was a passenger on a cosmic tide. The river carried him smoothly, gliding past the giant crystals. He watched as the reflection of the river played across the surfaces of the ice, painting them in shifting patterns of white and silver. It was a mesmerizing light show, silent and grand, performed just for him. Deep within the river, Leo saw shapes moving. They were not solid, but concentrated forms of light, brighter than the surrounding dust. They looked like manta rays made of moonlight. Their wide, flat wings undulated slowly, propelling them through the stream with languid grace. They were the guardians of the river, silent spirits of the current. One of the light rays drifted up beneath Leo. It was massive, its wingspan wider than a car, but it moved with such delicacy that it didn't disturb the flow. Leo reached down, his hand passing through the glowing substance of the creature. It felt warm, like dipping his hand into a sunbeam. The creature hummed, a low, contented sound that vibrated through Leo's spine, making him feel incredibly safe. He floated like this for what felt like hours, or perhaps days. Time was fluid here, dissolving into the rhythm of the journey. The river curved and twisted, taking him through arches of natural stone and tunnels carved through the center of giant comets. In one tunnel, the walls were lined with geodes of amethyst, creating a cavern of sparkling purple twilight. The river flowed through the center, a vein of silver in a heart of violet. Leo felt a deep drowsiness settling into his bones. It wasn't the exhaustion of a long day, but the heavy, sweet lethargy of total relaxation. His limbs felt heavy and pleasantly warm. His breathing slowed to match the undulating pulse of the light ray swimming beneath him. Inhale, glide. Exhale, drift. He looked up at the sky above the river. The stars here were densely packed, a canopy of glitter. Occasionally, a shooting star would streak across his vision, leaving a trail of gold that lingered for minutes before fading. He traced the lines of the constellations with his eyes, inventing his own stories for them. There was the great ship sailing west. There was the silent owl, watching with diamond eyes. There was the sleeping cat curled around a nebula. The river began to widen, the current slowing as it emptied into a vast, calm lagoon of light. Here, the stardust didn't flow. It swirled in lazy, hypnotic eddies. The crystal asteroids were fewer here, replaced by large, floating spheres of liquid water. These spheres, held together by surface tension, drifted through the lagoon like giant bubbles. Leo watched one float by. Inside the sphere of water, he could see a tiny ecosystem, a miniature world with small plants drifting in the center and tiny motes of light swimming around them. It was a perfect, contained universe, fragile and beautiful. He felt a sense of wonder at the infinite creativity of this place. He steered himself gently toward the edge of the lagoon, where the shore was formed by a bank of soft, dark clouds. These weren't storm clouds. They were pillows of cosmic dust, thick and inviting. He climbed out of the river of light, his body dripping with shedding sparkles that slowly floated back into the stream. He lay down on the bank of the cloud. It molded instantly to his shape, supporting his head, his back, his legs. It was softer than the moss, softer than his bed at home. It was like lying on a pile of feathers that extended infinitely down. He sank into it, feeling the cloud rise up around him to tuck him in. From his vantage point, he could look back at the river of stardust. It looked like a glowing ribbon unwinding into the dark, carrying the silent light rays and the drifting crystals to destinations unknown. The gentle light from the river cast a soft glow on his face, just enough to keep the dark at bay. The ambient sound here was a hushed whisper, the sound of the universe breathing. Who? Haya? It was rhythmic and constant, a white noise that smoothed out the edges of his thoughts. Leo felt his mind emptying completely. There were no words left, only images, the glint of a crystal, the sweep of a glowing wing, the swirl of silver dust. He curled onto his side, pulling his knees up slightly, settling into the perfect position for sleep. The cloud felt warm against his cheek. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for this journey. He was a small boy in a big universe, but he wasn't lost. He was found. He was held. His eyelids fluttered and then closed. But even with his eyes closed, he could still see the afterimage of the beautiful river, a path of light burning gently in his mind's eye. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the cloud, which smelled faintly of old books and rain, and let it out in a long, slow sigh. Leo was not yet asleep, but he was resting on the very edge of it, hovering in that sweet, heavy twilight between awareness and dreams. He knew that when he woke up, if he woke up, he would explore further. But for now, the stillness was enough. The quiet was enough. He lay there, a speck of warmth in the cool, beautiful vastness, listening to the chime of the distant crystals and the flow of the river, letting the cosmos rock him gently, endlessly, into the deep, velvet night. The Garden of Sleeping Suns. Leo lay on the bank of the cosmic cloud for a long time, drifting in the delicious borderland between wakefulness and slumber. The cool, silvery light of the River of Stardust eventually began to fade behind him, not because it was extinguished, but because a new light was rising to meet him. It was a gradual shift, like the slow turning of a season. The cool blues and violets of the deep vacuum softened, warming into shades of apricot, burnt orange, and deep, resonant gold. He opened his eyes slowly. The darkness of space had transformed. He was no longer drifting through a void of empty night. He had entered a vast, celestial canopy. Above him, below him, and stretching out into the infinite distance were branches. They were colossal, ancient boughs of wood that shimmered like polished mahogany, twisting and turning through the cosmos like the veins of a giant, sleeping god. This was the Garden of Sleeping Suns. The air here was different again. It was thick and rich, carrying a weight that felt like a warm blanket. It smelled of things that had been baking in the sun for centuries: warm cinnamon, roasted chestnuts, and the heavy, sweet scent of honeycomb. Leo took a deep breath, and the warmth filled him, chasing away the lingering chill of the crystal asteroid fields. It was a comfortable heat, like standing in a patch of sunlight on a rug in the middle of the afternoon. Leo pushed himself gently from his cloud raft, floating toward the nearest branch. As he got closer, he saw that the wood of the tree was actually woven strands of stardust and dark matter, solidified into a surface that looked like bark but felt like suede. He reached out and placed his hand against the trunk of the great cosmic tree. It hummed with a low, steady vibration, a purr of life that traveled up his arm and settled in his chest. The tree was alive. It was ancient and kind, and it didn't mind him being there. He pulled himself along the branch, moving deeper into the foliage. The leaves of these trees were not green. They were large, translucent sheets of amber and gold, shaped like the leaves of a maple tree but the size of a dining table. They swayed gently in the solar winds, brushing against each other with a sound that was not a rustle, but a soft, hushed whisper, like silk sliding over silk. S-H-H-H? S-H-H-H. Leo drifted through a cluster of these giant amber leaves. As he passed through them, they brushed against his face and arms. They were soft and dry, dusting his skin with a fine, golden pollen that glowed faintly. The light in the garden was filtered through these millions of leaves, creating a world of sepia and honey-colored shadows. It was a light that made everything look soft, blurring the edges of reality. Hanging from the branches, heavy and ripe, were the fruits of this garden. They were not apples or pears. They were miniature stars. Thousands of small, red dwarf stars and orange giants, no bigger than pumpkins, hung from thick stems. They were in a state of dormancy, their fires dimmed to a gentle, pulsing glow. They were the sleeping suns. Leo floated up to one of them. It was a sphere of swirling orange gas, contained within a delicate, transparent shell. He hovered before it, mesmerized by the slow churn of the plasma inside. It looked like molten caramel stirring itself. He brought his hands close to it, not touching it, but cupping the warmth it radiated. It warmed his palms instantly, a soothing heat that seemed to penetrate deep into his joints. He noticed that the suns were not silent. Each one emitted a faint, unique tone. One hummed a low C, another a soft E together. The thousands of sleeping fruits created a chord of infinite complexity and harmony, a drone of pure peace that filled the garden. It was a sound that made his eyelids heavy again. Movement caught his eye. Something large and slow was moving through the canopy above. Leo looked up and saw the gardeners. They were giant moths, creatures the size of small gliders, with wings made of velvet darkness patterned with spots of glowing gold. They fluttered from sun to sun, but their wings made no noise. They moved through the thick air with absolute silence, displacing the atmosphere with gentle waves of pressure that rocked Leo like a boat on a calm sea. One of the velvet moths descended near him. Its large, black eyes were pools of liquid calmness. It extended a fuzzy, feathered antenna towards the fruit Leo was admiring, checking its ripeness before moving on. The air from its wings washed over Leo, smelling of dusty books and vanilla. He felt no fear, only a sense of kinship with these quiet, nocturnal giants. Leo decided to climb higher. He drifted upwards, passing branch after branch, each one laden with the glowing harvest. The higher he went, the warmer it became, a cozy, drowsy heat that made his movements even slower. He found a fork in the branches, a place where 3 great boughs came together to form a natural cradle. The hollow was lined with a thick accumulation of the golden moss he had seen earlier, but here it was mixed with the fallen, dry leaves of the star trees. It looked like the most comfortable nest in the universe. Leo settled into it. The moss sank beneath his weight, molding to his shape perfectly. The sides of the tree trunk rose up around him, shielding him from the open space, creating a private, hidden nook. From this vantage point, he could look out over the entire orchard. It stretched endlessly, a forest of light and shadow. He watched the velvet moths weaving their silent patterns between the trees. He watched the sleeping sun's pulse in their slow rhythm, brighten, dim, brighten, dim. It was the breathing of the garden. He felt a profound sense of safety here. The tree held him securely, the leaves hid him from the vastness, the warmth protected him from the cold. There was nothing to do here but exist. There were no paths to follow, no destinations to reach. The journey itself was the destination. Leo reached into his pocket, a habit from Earth, and realized his pajamas were still warm from the fruit he had been near. He curled his legs up to his chest, resting his cheek against the mossy bark. The vibration of the tree was stronger here, against his ear. It sounded like a giant cat purring, a deep rumble of contentment. He watched a single leaf detach itself from a branch high above. It fell in slow motion, taking minutes to descend. It spiraled lazily, catching the light of the sleeping suns, turning from gold to bronze to copper as it twisted. Leo tracked its fall until it landed softly on the branch near his foot, coming to rest with a sigh. The golden dust in the air sparkled as it drifted. Leo imagined that each grain of dust was a tiny story, a small dream that had floated up from the earth and found its way here to rest. He closed his eyes, letting the orange light filter through his eyelids. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel the warmth of the garden. He thought about how far he had come. From his blue room, to the velvet void, to the crystal river, and now to this warm, amber nest. Each step had stripped away a layer of worry, a layer of noise. He felt lighter than he had ever felt, yet grounded by the presence of the ancient trees. His breathing synced with the pulsing of the nearby sunfruit. In and out, in and out. The rhythm was slow, incredibly slow. His heart rate slowed to match it. The boundary between his body and the tree began to blur. He felt like he was becoming part of the garden, just another sleeping thing nestled in the branches of eternity. A gentle breeze, a rare thing in this stillness, moved through the canopy. It was a warm draft, carrying the sound of distant chimes from the crystal shoals, now just a memory. The breeze rocked the branch ever so slightly, a gentle swaying motion that lulled him deeper. "Sleep," the garden seemed to whisper, not in words, but in the rustling of the leaves and the hum of the stars. "Rest now, you are safe, you are home." Leo let go of the last thread of alertness. He didn't fall asleep abruptly. He slid into it, like a boat sliding off a bank into a warm river. His thoughts turned into golden mist. His dreams became the slow, silent flight of the velvet moths. And there, in the crook of the cosmic tree, Surrounded by the gentle light of 1,000 sleeping suns, Leo drifted into a deep, restorative rest, while the universe continued its slow, magnificent turning around him. The ocean of midnight ink. Leo did not know how long he slept in the amber embrace of the star tree. In this place, sleep was not a loss of consciousness, but a deepening of it, a drift into a softer, quieter layer of reality. When he slowly blinked his eyes open, the light in the garden had changed. The golden brilliance of the sleeping suns had dimmed to a rich, burnished bronze, signaling a time of rest even for the stars. He sat up slowly in his mossy nest, stretching his arms. His body felt loose, completely free of any tension, as if his bones had turned to fluid. He looked over the edge of his branch. Below him, the massive, twisting trunk of the tree descended down, 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 disappearing into a layer of mist that swirled in shades of charcoal and deep indigo. A curiosity, gentle and unhurried, pulled him downward. He slipped out of the hollow, floating effortlessly near the bark of the great tree. He didn't need to climb. Gravity here was merely a suggestion. He simply guided himself alongside the colossal roots, which were thick as canyons and covered in velvet lichen that glowed with a faint, silver bioluminescence. As he descended, the air grew cooler again, but it was a pleasant change, like turning the pillow to the cool side in the middle of a warm night. The scent of roasted cinnamon faded, replaced by something cleaner, deeper, the smell of rain on slate, of deep water, of ancient stone. The mist cleared, and Leo gasped softly. Beneath the roots of the world tree lay an ocean, but it was not an ocean of water as he knew it. It was the ocean of midnight ink. The surface was perfectly smooth, a flawless mirror reflecting the distant, dimming stars above. It was black, but a black so rich and glossy that it seemed to contain every color of the spectrum hidden deep within its depths. Leo drifted until his toes hovered just inches above the surface. He expected it to be cold, but as he lowered his foot to touch it, the sensation was surprising. It was room temperature, silky and dense. It felt more like dipping his foot into warm oil or liquid silk than water. There was no splash, only a silent ripple that spread outward in a perfect circle, disturbing the reflection of the galaxy for a moment before smoothing out again. He lowered himself fully into the midnight water. It accepted him without resistance. He didn't sink like a stone. He hovered in the liquid, his buoyancy perfectly neutral. He realized with a calm delight that he could breathe here. The water was oxygenated stardust, a liquid atmosphere that filled his lungs with a cool, heavy peace. He tipped his head back and let himself submerge completely. The silence was instant and total. The faint hum of the garden above was gone, replaced by a profound, enveloping quiet. It was the sound of the bottom of the world. It wrapped around him like a heavy quilt, muting his thoughts, slowing his heart. Leo opened his eyes underwater. The visibility was surprisingly good. The darkness was not empty. It was illuminated by millions of tiny, floating specks of phosphorescence, like dust motes caught in a sunbeam, but glowing with their own internal blue light. He was swimming in a sea of stars. He moved his hands, pushing against the thick, inky water. Every movement created swirls of light, trailing behind his fingers like glowing smoke. It was mesmerizing to watch. He kicked his legs lazily, propelling himself deeper into the abyss. There was no pressure here, no crushing weight of the deep. There was only an embrace, firm and holding, pressing gently against his skin from all sides, making him feel swaddled and secure. Out of the deep gloom, shapes began to materialize. They were massive, moving with agonizing slowness. They were the whales of silence. These creatures were not made of flesh and blubber. They were translucent, their bodies made of glass-like cartilage and drifting nebulas. They were enormous, the size of city blocks, yet they moved with the grace of a falling feather. Leo watched as one approached him. Its skin was patterned with constellations, lines of light connecting glowing dots along its flank. The whale did not swim, it glided, propelled by the slow undulation of its massive tail. It passed Leo, its giant eye a pool of swirling gold, rotating to look at him. There was no malice in that gaze, only an ancient, sleepy recognition. The whale opened its mouth slightly, filtering the glowing plankton of the deep, and emitted a sound. It was not a cry, but a vibration. A low, resonant thrum that passed through the water and through Leo's body. It felt like a massage for his soul, a deep frequency that loosened the very last knots of worry he didn't even know he was holding. Huyuamamum. Leo reached out and placed his hand on the whale's flank as it passed. It felt smooth and cool, vibrating gently with the creature's song. He decided to hitch a ride. He grabbed onto a small ridge on the whale's back, not gripping tight, just holding on enough to be pulled along. The whale carried him deeper, down into the canyons of the midnight ocean. They passed towers of black coral that spiraled up from the depths, twisting in elegant, mathematical shapes. They glided over fields of seagrass that glowed neon blue, waving in the current created by the whale's passing. Leo lay flat against the back of the star whale, staring up at the surface far above. It looked like a ceiling of cracked glass, shimmering with the light of the garden he had left behind. But he didn't want to go back up. He liked it here in the deep. It was heavy, slow, and private. The rhythm of the whale's swimming was hypnotic. Undulate, glide, undulate, glide. It was a rocking motion like a cradle. Leo felt his eyes closing again. The water supported his head, his arms, his legs. He didn't need to hold on anymore. The current generated by the whale kept him in place, tucked into the slipstream of its movement. He felt a profound sense of isolation, but it was the good kind of isolation. The kind where the world can't find you. No phone could ring here. No alarm could sound. No voice could call his name. He was hidden in the ink, protected by the leviathans of the deep. As they swam on, the water began to change texture again. It became even thicker, warmer. They were entering the sea of dreams, the deepest layer of the ocean. Here, the water was filled with memories, not specific ones, but the feeling of happy memories. The sensation of a hug, the smell of old paper, the taste of hot chocolate, the feeling of sun on the face. These feelings washed over him physically, soaking into his pores. Leo released his hold on the whale and let himself drift free. The whale continued on its journey, its tail waving a slow goodbye, disappearing into the gloom. Leo hung suspended in the blackness, a tiny speck of light in the infinite dark. He curled into a ball, floating in the fetal position. The darkness was a womb, safe and eternal. He watched the bioluminescent specks dance around him, forming slow, swirling galaxies. He was no longer swimming, he was existing. He was just a point of awareness in a sea of peace. His breath was slow, so slow that minutes seemed to pass between the inhale and the exhale. The liquid air moved in and out of his lungs, bringing with it the essence of sleep. He felt his consciousness spreading out, thinning, becoming one with the water. He wasn't Leo anymore. He was part of the ocean. He was part of the silence. A gentle current caught him, rocking him back and forth. Left, right, left, right. It was the rhythm of a pendulum slowing down. The darkness pressed closer, soft as velvet, covering his eyes, covering his mind. There were no more sights to see, no more wonders to explore for now. There was only the feeling of the heavy, warm water and the deep, abiding quiet. It was time to sink deeper, past the level of dreams, into the level of pure, restorative oblivion. Leo drifted down, landing softly on a bed of sand that felt like powdered sugar. He lay there at the bottom of the universe, the weight of the midnight ocean holding him down, keeping him safe, keeping him still. And there, in the deepest dark, in the quietest place that ever existed, Leo finally let go completely. The Moonstone Caverns. Time had no meaning at the bottom of the ocean of midnight ink. It might have been minutes, or it might have been centuries that Leo lay there, cradled in the sugar-soft sand, wrapped in the heavy, protective blanket of the deep. He was a seed waiting in the winter earth, a stone resting in a riverbed, perfectly still, perfectly content. Slowly, very slowly, a change began to stir in the water around him. It wasn't a disturbance, but a gentle shifting of the current, a thermal of warmth rising from the core of the planet below. Leo felt the sand beneath him loosen its grip. The water, which had been holding him down with the weight of a heavy quilt, now began to lift him up with the lightness of a feather. He didn't need to swim. He didn't need to move a muscle. The ocean simply decided it was time to move him. He floated upward, his body limp and relaxed, ascending through the layers of darkness. He passed through the zone of deep dreams, past the lingering trails of the star whales, rising like a bubble toward the surface. As he rose, the pressure on his chest lightened, expanding his breath. The darkness began to dilute. The pitch black turned to a deep charcoal, then to a rich navy, and finally to a soft, hazy twilight. He broke the surface not with a splash, but with a silent glide, the water parting like oil to let him through. Leo opened his eyes and took a breath. The air here was different from the open cosmos. It was humid, rich with moisture and the scent of wet minerals and clean, damp stone. He was not under the open stars anymore. He had surfaced inside a colossal geode, a hidden pocket of space known as the Moonstone Caverns. He was floating in an underground lake, the water perfectly still and black as obsidian, reflecting the ceiling far above. And what a ceiling it was. The dome of the cavern was lined with millions of moonstones, large, raw formations of feldspar that glowed with a milky, pearlescent light. They didn't sparkle like diamonds. They shimmered with a soft, ghostly adolescence, a blue-white sheen that moved across the stone as Leo drifted. The light in the cavern was dim and watery, casting no harsh shadows, only soft gradients of gray and silver. It was the kind of light one sees just before dawn, when the world is monochromatic and still. Leo paddled gently toward the shore. The lake was rimmed not by sand, but by smooth, polished pebbles. They were moonstones, too, tumbled by the water for eons until they were perfectly round and smooth as eggs. As Leo pulled himself out of the water, the stones clicked softly against each other. Click, clack, shhh, the sound was hollow and soothing, echoing faintly against the cavern walls. He crawled onto the bank of pebbles. The stones were warm, heated from within by the same geothermal energy that had lifted him. Lying on them felt like lying on a heated massage table. The warmth seeped into his wet clothes, drying them instantly, and penetrated into his muscles, melting away the chill of the ascent. Leo rolled onto his back, nesting into the pile of smooth stones. They shifted to accommodate him, creating a perfect mold of his body. He looked up at the ceiling. The cavern was vast, a cathedral of rock. Stalactites hung from the roof, not sharp or menacing, but thick and rounded, dripping with mineral-rich water. Drip. Leo watched a single droplet fall from a stalactite high above. It fell through the milky air, catching the light like a falling pearl. It hit the surface of the black lake. Plop. The sound was pure and resonant. It echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the smooth walls. Plop, 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 the echoes overlapped, creating a soft, rhythmic texture of sound that was incredibly relaxing. It was nature's own metronome, ticking at a slow, lazy pace. He closed his eyes and listened to the acoustics of the cave. The silence here was different from the vacuum of space. It was a full silence, a hush that felt held and contained. He could hear the faint murmur of water lapping against the shore. Hush, wash, hush, wash, it was the breathing of the earth. He felt a presence nearby, but not a creature. It was the stones themselves. He reached out and picked up one of the moonstones. It was the size of a grapefruit, heavy and incredibly smooth. As he held it, the stone's glow intensified slightly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. It felt alive, not in a biological sense, but in a geological one, alive with the slow, deep energy of the ground. Leo sat up slowly, looking further into the cavern. At the far end of the lake, he saw a waterfall. But it wasn't water falling. It was a slow cascade of mist. A heavy, white fog was pouring over a ledge, tumbling down in slow motion like dry ice, pooling on the surface of the lake and spreading out towards him. The mistfall was silent, a ghostly curtain of white. As the mist reached the shore where Leo sat, it wrapped around his ankles, cool and refreshing. It swirled around the glowing moonstones, softening their light even further, turning the cavern into a dreamscape of fog and silver. He decided to walk towards the source of the mist. He stood up, his feet sinking slightly into the comfortable shift of the pebbles. Walking here was a slow process. Every step required a deliberate placement of the foot, a mindful connection with the ground. He walked along the shoreline, the smooth stones massaging the soles of his feet. As he walked, he noticed that the walls of the cavern were etched with patterns. At first, they looked like natural cracks, but as he looked closer, he saw they were spirals. Endless, interlocking spirals carved into the rock by ancient water flows. He traced one with his finger. The rock was cool and damp. Following the spiral with his eyes made him feel dizzy in a pleasant way, spiraling down into a deeper state of relaxation. He reached a small alcove near the mistfall. It was a shallow cave within the cave, a cozy indentation in the wall lined with soft, white moss that grew on the rocks. The moss was almost translucent, glowing with the same faint light as the moonstones. It looked like a bed of clouds. Leo climbed into the alcove. The sound of the dripping water was louder here, a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The mist swirled in front of the entrance, creating a natural curtain that screened him from the rest of the cavern. He was hidden, tucked away in a secret pocket of stone. He lay down on the moss. It was damp and cool, smelling of rain and earth. It felt grounding. After the weightlessness of space and the fluid suspension of the ocean, the feeling of solid rock beneath him was deeply comforting. It reminded him that he was real, that he had weight, that he was here. Above him, on the ceiling of the alcove, clusters of small crystals grew like flowers. They were faint purple and blue, fluorite crystals. They didn't emit light, but they caught the reflection of the moonstones and held it, glowing dimly in the shadows. Leo counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, his eyes traced the geometric shapes, the perfect cubes and pyramids of nature's design. The air in the alcove was supersaturated with oxygen and negative ions from the waterfall. Every breath felt like drinking a glass of cold water. It cleared his mind, washing away any lingering fog of confusion, leaving only a crystalline clarity of peace. He felt the heavy, comfortable fatigue returning. It was a cycle, he realized. Explore, rest, drift, rest. The universe was a series of cradles, each one different, each one perfect. He watched the mist outside his alcove thicken. It was filling the cavern, rising like a tide. Soon, the lake would be covered, the ceiling would be hidden, and he would be wrapped in a cocoon of white cloud. The thought was comforting, a blanket of fog to tuck him in. The sound of the water droplets seemed to slow down. Drip, plop, pause, drip, plop. The pauses between the sounds grew longer, stretching out into moments of profound silence. Leo waited for the next drop, his breath held gently in his chest. When it finally came, it was a soft release. He curled onto his side, pulling his knees up, resting his head on his arm. The moonstone he had picked up earlier was still in his hand. He held it against his chest, feeling its rhythmic warmth. It was his anchor. The glow of the cavern began to fade as his eyes closed. The white light of the moonstones turned to a soft gray behind his eyelids, then to a soothing darkness. He was safe in the heart of the rock. He was protected by the mountain. He was one with the stone. And as the mist finally rose to cover the entrance of his alcove, sealing him in with the quiet and the dark, Leo drifted away once more, carried on the slow, steady current of his own deep breathing, deeper into the peace of the underground night. The Valley of Paper Lanterns. The mist that had filled the Moonstone Cavern was not merely fog. It was a vehicle of transport, a gentle elevator made of cloud. Leo felt himself lifting, rising through a natural chimney in the rock. The cool dampness of the underground lake slowly dissipated, replaced by a drier, warmer breeze that smelled faintly of parchment and beeswax. The white fog thinned, shredding into wisps of vapor that clung to the mossy walls of the shaft. Above him, a circle of twilight sky appeared, a deep, rich purple that suggested the sun had just set, leaving behind the memory of warmth. Leo drifted up through the opening and stepped out onto solid ground. He had arrived in a high, hidden valley, nestled between the peaks of silent, shadowed mountains. But the valley was not dark. It was glowing. Hovering in the air, suspended by invisible threads of magic or perhaps just the stillness of the atmosphere, were thousands of paper lanterns. They filled the valley floor and rose up the slopes like a tide of warm, golden fireflies. They were of all shapes and sizes. Some were round and simple like full moons, others were rectangular and tall, and some were shaped like lotus flowers or intricate houses. Leo stood on a wooden platform at the edge of the valley, looking out over this sea of warm light. The glow was breathtaking. It was a soft, diffuse amber radiance that bathed the entire landscape in a cozy, sepia tone. It looked like the world was being viewed through the flicker of a candle flame. He stepped off the platform onto a path made of smooth, weathered wooden planks. The wood was warm under his bare feet, retaining the heat of a long, sunny day. He began to walk down the path, descending slowly into the heart of the lantern field. As he walked, the lanterns drifted closer. He reached out to touch one. It was a large, spherical lantern made of thick, creamy rice paper. The texture was rough and fibrous under his fingertips, dry and comforting. He could feel the frame inside, thin strips of bamboo, flexible and strong. Inside the paper shell, a small flame burned steadily. It didn't flicker wildly. It stood tall and calm, a teardrop of light that radiated a gentle, dry heat against his palm. There was no wind in the valley to blow the lanterns away. They simply hovered, bobbing ever so slightly in the air currents Leo created as he walked. They were like friendly spirits, curious and welcoming. As he passed a cluster of small, red lanterns, they parted gently to let him through, then drifted back together in his wake. The sound of the valley was the sound of silence wrapped in paper. Occasionally, he would hear the faint crinkle of the rice paper as a lantern shifted, a sound as dry and crisp as autumn leaves. It was a satisfying, small sound, emphasizing the quiet rather than breaking it. The path wound its way through the center of the valley, meandering between ancient, gnarled trees. These weren't the star trees he had seen before. These were more like cherry blossom trees, but instead of flowers, they bore small, glowing lanterns on their branches. The light filtered through the branches, casting intricate, lacy shadows on the wooden path. Leo stopped to admire a particularly beautiful lantern shaped like a fish. It was painted with delicate strokes of blue and gold ink. The light from within made the ink glow, bringing the painted scales to life. He watched it float at eye level, its paper fins swaying in slow motion. He felt a sense of connection to the artist who had made it, a feeling of gratitude for the beauty placed here just for him to find. The air here was exceptionally pleasant. It was the temperature of a perfect autumn evening, cool enough to make the warmth of the lanterns feel luxurious, but not cold enough to chill him. He inhaled deeply. The scent was a mix of old books, warm wood, melting wax, and the dry, sweet smell of tall grass drying in the fields nearby. He continued his walk, his pace unhurried. The path led him toward a small structure in the middle of the valley. It was a pavilion, an open-sided gazebo built of dark, polished mahogany. Its roof curved upward at the corners, elegant and sweeping. Soft, silk curtains hung from the pillars, tied back with gold cords, framing the view of the glowing valley. Leo stepped up into the pavilion. The floor was covered in thick, woven tatami mats that felt springy and organic beneath his feet. In the center of the pavilion was a low table, and around it were piled cushions. These weren't ordinary cushions. They were oversized, plush pillows covered in velvet and silk in shades of burgundy, gold, and midnight blue. He approached the pile of cushions. They looked impossibly inviting. He let himself sink down into them. They accepted his weight completely, surrounding him with softness. He adjusted a velvet pillow behind his head and swung his legs up, reclining fully. From this position, he could look out at the valley from a place of supreme comfort. The roof of the pavilion shielded him from the open sky, creating a cozy, enclosed feeling, while the open sides allowed him to watch the lantern show. He watched as a group of lanterns slowly drifted upward, rising toward the mountain peaks. They moved in unison, a river of gold flowing uphill against the dark backdrop of the stone. It was hypnotic. Up and up they went, shrinking slowly until they were indistinguishable from the stars. The light in the pavilion was dim and restful. A single iron lantern hung from the center of the roof, casting a steady, warm circle of light on the tatami mats. Leo stared at the flame. It was mesmerizing. The orange center, the blue halo, the way it stood so still. He felt his own internal rhythm slowing down to match the stillness of that flame. He realized that he didn't have a single thought in his head. The worries, the plans, the questions, they had all been left behind in the cave, washed away by the mist. Here, there was only the glow. There was only the warmth. He ran his hand over the fabric of the cushion beneath him. It was silk, cool and smooth to the touch, contrasting with the warmth of the air. He traced the embroidered pattern with his finger, swirls and vines that went on forever. The repetitive motion was soothing. Trace, loop, trace, loop. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains of the pavilion. They billowed inward, slow and heavy, like the sails of a ship in a calm harbor. The movement changed the light in the room, causing shadows to dance softly across the floor. It was a lullaby for the eyes. Leo felt his eyelids drooping. They felt heavy, coated in the golden dust of sleep. He tried to keep them open to watch the lanterns, but the comfort was too commanding. He let them close for a moment, just to rest them. Behind his closed eyes, he could still see the warm afterimage of the lanterns, soft orange circles floating in the dark. The warmth of the valley seemed to seep into his bones, loosening his muscles, unknitting his brow. He felt his jaw relax, his shoulders drop away from his ears. He listened to the silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of peace. It was a silence that said, "Everything is okay. Everything is done. You can rest now." He felt the wooden floor beneath the mats supporting him, solid and unmoving. He felt the roof above him, sheltering him. He felt the valley around him, holding the light for him. Leo shifted slightly, burying his cheek into the velvet pillow. The scent of the wax and wood was stronger here, close to the floor. It smelled like home. It smelled like safety. He drifted in that sweet, golden haze, hovering between the waking world and the world of dreams. He was aware of the lanterns floating outside, aware of the mountains standing guard, but they were becoming distant, part of a beautiful painting that he was slowly stepping out of. He was ready to go deeper. He was ready to leave the valley of light and enter the castle of sleep. But for now, he lingered in the pavilion, a boy resting on a cloud of velvet, bathed in the gentle, flickering glow of 10,000 paper stars. And as the night deepened, the lanterns burned a little lower. The light grew a little softer, and Leo's breathing became a slow, steady rhythm, joining the silent chorus of the valley. The train of drifting clouds. Leo lay in the mahogany pavilion for a long while, watching the paper lanterns dance their slow, silent waltz against the backdrop of the mountain peaks. The peace in the valley was absolute, a heavy, golden stillness that seemed to stop time itself. But as he lay there, resting on the velvet cushions, he began to feel a subtle vibration in the floorboards beneath him. It was not a jarring shaking, but a gentle, rhythmic thrumming. Hum-thump, hum-thump. It was a soothing pulse, like the purring of a giant cat or the heartbeat of the earth. Leo opened his eyes halfway. The mist at the edge of the valley, which had been stationary, began to swirl and part, revealing a set of tracks. But these were not iron rails, cold and hard. They were ribbons of polished silver, glowing softly in the twilight, curving out of the clouds and stopping right beside his pavilion. From the depth of the mist, a shape emerged. It was a train, but it was unlike any machine built of steel and steam. It was crafted from dark, polished walnut wood and burnished brass that gleamed with a warm, inviting luster. It didn't chug or screech. It glided. It moved with the grace of a swan on a lake, drifting silently along the silver tracks until it came to a gentle halt in front of the pavilion. Steam hissed softly from beneath the wheels, but it wasn't hot, scalding steam. It was cool, scented mist that smelled of Earl Grey tea and rain. The doors of the carriage slid open with a hushed whisper, revealing an interior bathed in a welcoming amber glow. There was no conductor, no crowd of passengers pushing to get on. This train had arrived solely for him. Leo stood up from his cushion nest. He felt heavy with sleep, his movements slow and languid. He walked across the tatami mats and stepped onto the train. As soon as his foot touched the plush carpet of the corridor, the doors slid shut behind him, sealing out the cool air of the valley and enveloping him in a cocoon of warmth and silence. The corridor was narrow and cozy, lined with wood paneling that felt satin-smooth to the touch. Brass lamps shaped like flowers sprouted from the walls, casting pools of yellow light on the burgundy carpet. The air inside was still and rich, smelling of old leather, cedarwood, and a faint hint of vanilla. Leo walked down the corridor, his footsteps completely silent, absorbed by the thick wool of the carpet. He trailed his hand along the wall, feeling the steady, reassuring vibration of the engine. It was a physical hum that traveled up his arm and settled in his shoulders, loosening them even further. He reached a door marked with a small gold star. He knew, instinctively, that this was his compartment. He slid the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was a masterpiece of comfort. It was small, intimate, and designed for one purpose: rest. On one side was a large window, draped with heavy velvet curtains in a deep midnight blue. On the other side was a bed, not a narrow bunk, but a wide, luxurious bed piled high with quilts and pillows. The sheets were crisp white cotton, turned down invitingly. The duvet was thick and fluffy, promising a weight that would hold him down and keep him safe. Leo sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, sinking deeply beneath him, molding to his shape. At that moment, the train began to move. There was no lurch, no sudden jerk, just a smooth transition from stillness to motion. He looked out the window. The valley of paper lanterns was drifting away, the thousands of lights blurring into a stream of gold before disappearing into the mist. The train was picking up speed, but it was a gentle speed. It lifted off the ground, the silver tracks rising into the sky. They were flying. The train soared into the clouds, leaving the mountains behind. Outside the window, there was nothing but a sea of silver vapor, illuminated by the light of a moon that was huge and full. The rhythm of the train established itself. Clack-hass-h-h-h, clack-hass-h-h-h, clack-hass-h-h-h. It was a soft, muffled sound, dampened by the clouds and the luxury of the carriage. It was a heartbeat. It was a rocking chair. It was the most hypnotic sound Leo had ever heard. The cabin swayed gently with the motion. It wasn't a dizzying sway, but a comforting, side-to-side rocking motion, like a cradle being pushed by a loving hand. Rock and steady, rock and steady. On a small wooden table by the window, a tray had appeared. On it sat a porcelain cup of steaming cocoa, topped with a small mountain of whipped cream and a plate with a single soft cookie. Leo took the cup. It was warm in his hands. He took a sip. It was rich, sweet, and coated his throat with warmth that spread down to his stomach. He finished the cocoa slowly, watching the clouds rush by. Sometimes the mist would clear, and he would see star fields stretching out to infinity, brighter and clearer than he had ever seen them. Sometimes the train would pass through a cloud that glittered with internal lightning, soft flashes of pink and violet that illuminated the cabin for a brief second before fading. Leo set the cup down and decided it was time. He kicked off his shoes and climbed under the heavy duvet. It settled over him like a hug, weighted and warm. He pulled the blankets up to his chin, burying his face in the pillows. They smelled of fresh laundry and lavender. Lying there, horizontal and held by the bed, the motion of the train became even more pronounced. The gentle vibration hummed through the mattress, massaging his back. The rhythmic clack-sh-h-h of the wheels became a mantra. He reached out and clicked a small switch on the wall. The golden lamps dimmed, fading until they were just a faint, warm glow, barely brighter than a candle. The cabin was now filled with shadows and the silver moonlight spilling in from the window. Leo watched the play of light and shadow on the ceiling. The rhythm of the train seemed to sync with his breathing. Inhale, the train rocks left. Exhale, the train rocks right. Clack sh-h-h. Inhale, clack sh-h-h. Exhale. He felt a heavy, delicious drowsiness washing over him, starting at his toes and moving slowly up his body. His legs felt like lead, heavy and relaxed. His arms felt limp. His eyelids felt as though tiny weights had been placed upon them. He thought about where the train might be going. To the moon, to the edge of the dawn, to the library of dreams. It didn't matter. The destination wasn't important. The journey was everything. The train was a moving sanctuary, a capsule of safety traveling through the quiet night. The sound of the wind outside was a low whistle, a white noise that wrapped around the train, insulating it from the rest of the universe. Inside, it was just Leo, the rhythm and the warmth. He turned onto his side, facing the window. Through the crack in the velvet curtains, he saw a shooting star keep pace with the train for a moment, racing along the horizon before diving into a bank of clouds. Good night, star, he thought. The train began a slow, banking turn. The motion pressed him gently deeper into the mattress. He felt entirely supported. There was no need to hold onto anything. The train had him. The tracks had him. The night had him. His thoughts began to fragment, turning into soft, nonsensical images. A lantern turning into a balloon. A fish swimming in the sky. A whale singing a lullaby. The logic of the waking world was fading, replaced by the soft, fluid logic of dreams. The rhythm of the wheels slowed down just a fraction, becoming deeper, more resonant. Dum-dum, S-H-H-H, dum-dum, S-H-H-H. Leo's eyes finally closed. He didn't try to open them again. The darkness behind his lids was warm and velvety. He was safe in his compartment, speeding softly through the sea of clouds, headed towards a destination of pure, uninterrupted sleep. And as the train continued its endless, gentle journey across the roof of the world, Leo finally allowed himself to drift off, carried away by the motion, the sound, and the deep, abiding peace of the night. The library of velvet books. The rhythmic clack-hsh of the train began to change. The intervals between the sounds grew longer, stretching out until they became a single, smooth glide. The gentle rocking motion that had cradled Leo for miles settled into a steady, flat calm. The train was not stopping abruptly. It was simply arriving, drifting like a leaf onto a pond. Outside the window, the sea of clouds and the open sky had been replaced by walls. But they were not walls of brick or stone. As the train glided silently into its final station, Leo saw that they were passing through a canyon of books. Shelves, towering hundreds of feet high, lined the tracks, filled with millions of volumes in every color imaginable: deep crimsons, forest greens, midnight blues, and rich, leather-bound browns. With a final, barely audible sigh of steam, the train came to a halt. The door of Leo's compartment slid open, revealing not a busy platform, but a quiet, carpeted landing. The air that drifted in was warm and smelled divinely of vanilla, almond, old leather, and wood polish, the unmistakable, comforting scent of an ancient library. Leo stepped off the train. As soon as his feet touched the ground, the train dissolved into mist behind him, its job done, fading back into the dream from which it came. He was left standing in the grand hall of the library. The space was magnificent, yet intimate. Despite the soaring ceilings, which were lost in warm shadows high above, the room felt cozy. The light came from thousands of brass reading lamps sitting on heavy oak tables, each casting a pool of golden light on the green felt surfaces. There were no fluorescent lights, only the soft, amber glow of incandescent bulbs and the flickering warmth of fireplaces. Leo walked across the floor. It was covered in thick Persian rugs, layer upon layer of intricate patterns in red and gold. They were so plush that he felt like he was walking on moss again. The silence here was thick and heavy, a preserved silence that felt like it had been undisturbed for centuries. It wasn't empty. It was full of all the stories resting on the shelves, waiting to be dreamt. He trailed his hand along the spines of the books as he walked. They felt distinct under his fingertips, some rough and canvas-like, others smooth as cool glass, some embossed with gold leaf that tickled his skin. He didn't read the titles. He didn't need to. He knew that every book here contained a happy memory, a peaceful landscape, or a gentle dream. He wandered deeper into the aisles, drawn toward a warm glow at the far end of the hall. There, he found a massive stone fireplace, large enough to stand inside. A fire was burning there, but it was a slow, steady fire. The logs were thick and ancient, glowing with a deep red heat, occasionally shifting with a soft crackle and sending a shower of lazy sparks up the chimney. In front of the fireplace stood a large wingback chair. It was upholstered in worn, soft leather the color of dark chocolate. It looked like the most comfortable chair in existence. A knitted blanket was draped over the armrest, and a small, round table beside it held a stack of books. Leo approached the chair and sat down. The leather creaked softly, a welcoming sound as it adjusted to his body. He pulled his legs up, tucking them beneath him, and reached for the knitted blanket. He pulled it over his shoulders. It was heavy and warm, instantly stopping any draft, making him feel like he was wrapped in a cocoon. He looked at the small table. On top of the stack lay a book. It had no title on the cover. It was bound in deep, midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light of the fire. Leo reached out and picked it up. The texture was exquisite, soft, plush, and warm to the touch. It felt more like a living thing than an object. He opened the book slowly. The pages were not made of paper, but of thin, pressed cotton, soft and silent as he turned them. There were no words on the pages. Instead, there were moving illustrations, painted in soft watercolors that shifted and flowed like liquid. On the first page, he saw a meadow of tall grass swaying in a breeze. As he looked at it, he could almost smell the grass, could almost feel the wind on his face. He turned the page. The next image was of a rainstorm over a calm ocean, the gray clouds dropping curtains of rain into the sea. He stared at it, and the sound of the rain began to whisper in his ears, a soft, static hush that mixed with the crackling of the fire. Hush, crackle, hush. Leo felt his eyes tracing the slow movements of the ink on the page. It was hypnotic. He wasn't reading a story, he was absorbing a feeling. The book was a mirror of his own desire for rest. He turned another page. This one showed a night sky, identical to the one he had swum through earlier. The stars on the page twinkled gently. He felt a wave of heavy relaxation roll over him. The book felt heavy in his hands, a good, grounding weight. He leaned his head back against the wings of the chair. The firelight danced on the ceiling, creating shadows that stretched and shrank in a slow rhythm. The heat from the hearth warmed his face and his toes. He felt entirely insulated from the world. There were no demands here, no clocks ticking, only the fire, the books, and the quiet. Leo let the book rest on his lap, his hand still resting on the velvet page. He watched the fire. He watched the way the flames licked the wood, how the embers pulsed, bright red, dull red, bright red, dull red. It was breathing. Everything in this universe breathed in the same slow tempo. A small dust mote floated past his nose, illuminated by the firelight. He watched it dance, spiraling upward on a thermal current, disappearing into the shadows of the shelves. He felt safe. He felt wise, as if the silence of the library was sharing its secrets with him. The secret was simple, just be. His eyelids were so heavy now. They felt like they were made of the same velvet as the book. He allowed them to close just for a moment, but the moment stretched. The sound of the fire became a steady, comforting roar in the background, like the sound of the ocean in a shell. The smell of the old books wrapped around him like a perfume of peace. He sank deeper into the leather chair. He was no longer a visitor. He was a resident of the library. He was a story being written in real time, a story about a boy who found the quietest place in the world. Leo didn't sleep yet, not fully. He hovered in that delicious, golden space where thoughts turn into dreams and dreams feel like memories. He was aware of the warmth, aware of the softness, aware of the peace, and that was enough. He sat there, the boy in the leather chair, with the velvet book on his lap, guarded by the millions of silent stories, while the fire burned on, warm and eternal in the heart of the library. The Tower of Silent Glass. The fire in the great stone hearth had burned down to a bed of glowing embers, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic, deep red light. The warmth in the library was still there, but it had settled, becoming a heavy, stationary blanket of comfort. Leo, curled in the depths of the leather wingback chair, felt the change in the atmosphere. It was the feeling of the late, late hours, that sacred time when the world isn't just quiet, but asleep. He slowly closed the velvet book that rested on his lap. He didn't need to see the end of the picture story, he felt it. He ran his hand one last time over the plush, midnight blue cover, feeling the soft nap of the fabric against his palm. He placed the book gently on the stack beside him. Tap. It made no sound, settling perfectly into its place. Leo uncurled his legs. His body felt wonderfully heavy, filled with a sweet, pleasant lethargy. Standing up required a slow, deliberate effort. He pushed himself up from the chair, his feet sinking deep into the Persian rug. He stretched, reaching his arms up toward the shadowed ceiling, and felt a satisfying release in his back. A yawn, long and deep, escaped him, filling his lungs with the scent of old paper and wood smoke. He knew it was time to find his bed. Not a resting place for a nap, but the place for the deep sleep. He looked around the dim library. Between two towering shelves of emerald green books, he noticed a shadow that was slightly different from the rest. He walked toward it, his steps silent on the thick carpet. As he drew closer, he saw that it was an archway carved from dark oak. Inside the archway was a staircase. It was a spiral staircase, winding upward into the darkness. The steps were made of polished wood, worn smooth by the passage of time. A handrail wrapped in soft leather curved gracefully alongside it. Leo placed his hand on the rail. It was cool and solid, offering a steady support. He began to climb. Step, step, step. The ascent was slow. There was no rush. Every step was a shedding of the day, a shedding of the journey. With each rotation of the spiral, Leo felt lighter in spirit but heavier in body. The air began to change as he went higher. The scent of the fireplace faded, replaced by a crisp, clean coolness, the scent of starlight and high altitude. The staircase seemed to go on for a long time, but Leo didn't mind. The repetitive motion of lifting his foot and placing it down was meditative. The wood creaked very faintly, a homey, comforting sound that whispered, "You are almost there." Finally, the stairs ended. Leo stepped out onto a circular floor. He had arrived in the tower of silent glass. It was a circular room, the highest point of the library, perhaps the highest point of this entire dream world. The walls were not made of stone or wood, but of thick, flawless glass. Above him, the ceiling was a perfect dome of transparency, offering an unobstructed view of the entire cosmos. The view was breathtaking, yet it didn't stimulate him, it soothed him. The universe outside was still. The stars were not twinkling aggressively. They were glowing with a steady, watchful light. The nebulas were vast, motionless clouds of color, lavender, indigo, and soft charcoal. The chaotic movement of the asteroid fields and the flowing rivers of light were far below now. Here, there was only the vast, silent peace of the void. In the center of the round room stood a bed. It was large, circular, and looked less like a piece of furniture and more like a cloud that had been captured and tamed. The frame was made of pale, driftwood-like timber, smooth and rounded. The mattress was thick, covered in sheets of pure white linen that seemed to glow in the starlight. Leo walked toward the bed. The floor here was made of cool, polished stone, but a thick, white rug surrounded the sleeping area, soft as fur under his feet. He reached the edge of the bed and touched the duvet. It was cool to the touch, heavy and substantial. It was filled not with feathers, but with something lighter, something that promised to regulate his temperature perfectly. He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress absorbed his weight gently, sinking down just enough to cradle him. He took a moment to look out at the stars one last time. He saw the faint, blue marble of Earth far, far away, a tiny speck of peace. He sent a silent thought of gratitude to it, then turned his attention back to the room. On a small bedside table made of glass, there was a glass of water and a small, round stone that emitted a faint, amber glow. A nightlight powered by the energy of the sleeping suns from the garden. It cast a warm, localized circle of light, making the bed feel like an island of safety in the sea of blue night. Leo swung his legs up and onto the bed. He moved slowly, shifting his weight until he was in the center. He pulled the cool, crisp sheet and the heavy duvet up over his legs, over his waist, over his chest. He settled back against the pillows. The pillows were magnificent. They were huge and incredibly soft, yet they supported his head and neck perfectly. As his head hit the pillow, he felt a wave of relaxation wash down his spine, untying the very last knot of tension. He let out a long breath. He lay on his back for a moment, looking up through the glass dome. The stars seemed to look down at him. They were guardians, silent sentinels keeping watch while he slept. The silence in the tower was absolute. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of fullness, of completion. There was no wind here, no creaking, just the sound of his own slow, steady breathing. In and out, in and out. He felt the weight of the duvet pressing him down into the mattress. It was a grounding weight, a physical reminder that he was safe, that he didn't need to move, didn't need to think, didn't need to be anyone other than a boy in a bed of clouds. He rolled onto his side, his favorite sleeping position. He pulled the duvet up to his ear, creating a warm, dark pocket. He tucked his hand under the pillow. The amber light from the nightstone was fading now, dimming in sync with his consciousness. His eyelids fluttered. They felt too heavy to keep open. The view of the stars blurred, turning into soft smears of light. He let his eyes close. The darkness that greeted him was welcoming. It wasn't black. It was a deep, rich velvet purple, swirling with the afterimages of the beautiful things he had seen. The blue ocean, the golden lanterns, the green moss. Leo felt his body dissolving into the bed. He couldn't tell where his skin ended and the sheets began. He was just a warm point of awareness, floating in the tower. A thought drifted through his mind, slow and sweet like honey. I can stay here as long as I want. The concept of time evaporated completely. There was no tomorrow. There was no yesterday. There was only this eternal, comfortable now. His breathing slowed even further, becoming deep and rhythmic, the breath of deep sleep. His heart beat slowly, a calm drum in the quiet room. Thump, thump, silence, thump, thump, silence. He was drifting. He was sinking. He was letting go. The tower held him up toward the stars, an offering to the night. And the night accepted him, wrapping him in its arms, covering him with its blanket of silence. Leo was no longer visiting the dream. He was part of it. He was the silence. He was the peace. He slept. The nebula of pastel drifts. Leo lay fast asleep in the tower of silent glass, his breathing deep and even, a rhythm that matched the slow rotation of the galaxy outside. For a while, there was only darkness, the rich, restorative velvet darkness of a dreamless slumber. But the universe he had entered was not one to leave a traveler in the dark for long. It was a place where dreams were not just images in the mind. but places one could visit. Slowly, gently, the reality of the tower began to shift. The glass dome above him, which had been a solid barrier against the vacuum, softened. It didn't break. It simply dissolved, turning into a fine, shimmering mist that floated away into the night. The walls of the library faded, stepping back until they were gone completely. Leo was still in his bed. The mattress, the heavy duvet, the soft pillows, they remained real and solid beneath him. But the bed was no longer resting on a stone floor. It was floating. It had become a raft, a vessel of comfort drifting untethered in the open sky. The bed raft rose slowly, carried by a thermal of warm air. It drifted up past the spires of the library, higher than the mountains, higher than the Valley of Lanterns. Leo, still asleep but aware in that deep, dreamy way, felt the sensation of rising. It was a feeling of lightness, as if gravity had decided to let him go completely. He drifted into a new region of the sky. The deep indigo of space began to lighten, transforming into a soft, dreamlike palette. He was entering the nebula of pastel drifts. Here, the darkness was replaced by swirling clouds of color: soft lilac, pale rose, creamy mint, and baby blue. It looked like the sky at the very first moment of a gentle sunrise, stretched out forever. The air here was thick and visible. It wasn't empty space. It was a sea of soft vapor. The bed pushed through the clouds like a boat through foam. Wisps of pink mist curled over the edge of the mattress, brushing against Leo's cheek. They felt cool and moist, smelling faintly of cotton candy and morning dew. As the bed drifted deeper into the nebula, the silence changed. It became a texture. The air was filled with a low, harmonious humming, a sound that wasn't quite music but was too melodic to be wind. It was the sound of the nebula vibrating, a pink noise that blanketed the mind in fuzziness. Leo rolled over in his sleep, his hand dangling off the side of the bed. His fingers grazed the top of a passing cloud. It felt substantial, like soft wool or spun sugar. The cloud responded to his touch, glowing briefly with a warm inner light before drifting behind him. Ahead, floating in the pastel expanse, were the bubbles of memory. They were large, iridescent spheres, drifting aimlessly in the current. As Leo's bed floated past one, he saw an image inside. It was a scene of a fireplace burning on a rainy day. He floated past another bubble and saw a field of sunflowers swaying in the wind. These were not his memories specifically, but the collective peaceful thoughts of the universe, stored here in the safety of the nebula. The bed began to rotate slowly, spinning in a lazy circle as it followed the lazy current of the air. The motion was sickeningly sweet and slow, a constant, gentle pivot that made the horizon blur into a smear of soft colors. Leo dreamed that he was lighter than air. In his dream, he saw himself not as a boy, but as a cloud changing shape, stretching and contracting with the wind. He felt no boundaries. He was the bed, he was the duvet, he was the mist. A school of dreamfish swam past him. They were translucent, made of shimmering jelly and light. They had long, trailing fins that looked like ribbons of silk. They swam through the air as if it were water, undulating around the bed, curious about the sleeping passenger. One of the fish, glowing with a soft lemon light, nuzzled against the pillow near Leo's head. It let out a soft bloop sound, a bubble of sound that popped gently, releasing a scent of lemon balm. The temperature in the nebula was perfect warmth. It felt like being wrapped in a towel that had just come out of the dryer. The heat seemed to radiate from the clouds themselves. It penetrated the duvet, warming Leo's toes, his knees, his back. It was a soporific heat, a heat that made it impossible to do anything but surrender. The bed drifted toward a waterfall of clouds, a place where the pink mist cascaded down in a slow-motion tumble into a lower layer of blue vapor. The bed tipped forward gently, riding the crest of the cloud fall. It didn't drop. It glided down the slope of the mist, a long, smooth slide into the blue. Whoosh, hush. The descent was exhilarating in a slow, safe way. It felt like sliding down a hill of feathers. At the bottom of the fall, the bed leveled out, gliding across a lake of dense, blue fog. This was the sea of deep sleep. Here, the light was dimmer. The pastels darkened into soothing shades of periwinkle and slate. The humming sound deepened into a lower register, a bass note that resonated in Leo's chest. Thrum, thrum. Leo buried his face deeper into the pillow. He was so far away from the waking world now. He was deep in the geography of sleep. There were no maps for this place. There were no clocks. There was only the drift. The bed continued its journey across the blue fog. Occasionally, it would bump gently against a floating island of soft moss, bouncing off with a cushioned recoil. Bump, drift, bump, drift. He felt a profound sense of solitude, but it was a warm solitude. The universe was holding him. The nebula was wrapping him in layers of color and sound. He was a precious cargo, being transported to the very center of peace. As part 10 drew to a close, Leo's bed entered a tunnel formed by arching clouds. The tunnel was lined with soft, glowing crystals that pulsed in time with his breathing. He was moving deeper, further in, leaving the pastel skies for something even quieter, even softer. He was the boy on the flying bed, the explorer of the softest places, sailing endlessly through the night of cotton and light. The tunnel of soft echoes. The transition from the open, pastel expanse of the nebula into the enclosed sanctuary of the tunnel was not abrupt. It was a gradual enveloping, a sensation similar to pulling a heavy, down-filled hood over one's head on a cold night. The flying bed, carrying the deeply sleeping Leo, drifted silently beneath the archway of clouds. The soft, diffuse light of the rose and mint-colored mists slowly faded behind him, replaced by a deeper, more intimate shadow. Leo was now entering the tunnel of soft echoes. It was a passage that existed between the layers of the dream world, a connector that led from the high skies of imagination down to the bedrock of deep rest. The tunnel was not straight. It was a gentle, winding spiral, curving downward in a lazy, hypnotic corkscrew motion. The walls of this tunnel were a marvel of texture. They were not made of stone, earth, or ice. They appeared to be constructed from layers of compressed velvet and solidified dusk. They were a deep, resonant indigo, darker than the night sky but softer, possessing a matte finish that seemed to absorb any stray light rather than reflecting it. If one were to touch the walls, as Leo's bed occasionally brushed against them, they would feel like the skin of a peach or the surface of a moss-covered stone, dry and incredibly soft. As the bed glided deeper into the passage, the acoustics changed dramatically. The faint humming of the nebula outside was cut off instantly, replaced by a profound, cushioned silence. But it was not an empty silence. The tunnel had a unique property. It preserved the soft sounds of the universe. Floating in the air, suspended like ribbons of faint bioluminescence, were the visual representations of these sounds. Leo, in his lucid slumber, drifted through them. A ribbon of pale blue light brushed against the foot of the bed. It was the visual echo of a page turning in a quiet room. A sphere of warm, golden mist bumped gently against the pillow. It was the preserved sound of a cat purring on a sunny windowsill. A stream of silver dust swirled around Leo's head, the memory of rain falling on a tent. These were the soft echoes. They lived here, safe from the noise of the waking world. The bed moved through them, disrupting them gently, causing them to swirl and dance in slow motion before settling back into place. The air in the tunnel was thick with these silent sounds, creating an atmosphere of extreme comfort. It felt as though the tunnel itself was whispering a continuous, unintelligible lullaby, a shhh that lasted for miles. The descent was slow and steady. The angle of the tunnel was shallow, just enough to allow gravity to pull the bed forward at a walking pace. Leo's body registered the movement as a gentle sinking sensation. It was the feeling of being lowered slowly into a warm bath, or the sensation of an elevator descending so smoothly that one barely notices the motion. He lay on his side, his cheek pressed into the cool, crisp fabric of the pillow. One arm was tucked under his head, the other resting loosely atop the heavy duvet. In this deep state of rest, his senses were muted but still receptive to the environment. He could feel the change in air pressure as they went deeper. The air became denser, heavier. It sat on his chest with a comforting weight, encouraging his breathing to slow down even further. Inhale. The air tasted of ozone and deep, cool earth. Exhale. The tension left his body in a long, invisible stream. The tunnel walls began to pulse with a faint, rhythmic light. It was a bioluminescence, similar to the glow of fireflies but much slower. Sections of the indigo velvet would lighten to a soft violet, hold the color for a few seconds, and then fade back to black. This pulsing traveled down the length of the tunnel, acting as a guide, leading the bed further into the depths. It created a mesmerizing visual rhythm: pulse, fade, darkness, pulse, fade, darkness. Leo's bed approached a wide curve in the tunnel. As it banked gently to the left, the mattress tilted slightly. Leo didn't roll. The bedding held him securely, like a cradle. The friction of the bed passing through the thick air created a sound like silk sliding over silk, a soft swish that was incredibly soothing. He passed a small alcove in the wall of the tunnel. Nestled inside, glowing with a warm amber light, was a cluster of slumber mushrooms. They were large, umbrella-shaped fungi that emitted a steady, low heat. As the bed passed them, a wave of warmth washed over Leo, heating the air around his face for a brief moment before the cool of the tunnel returned. The contrast was delightful. Cool pillow, warm air, cool pillow. The spiral continued downward, looping over itself. Leo was descending into the very foundations of the dream world. The echoes became denser here. The air was filled with floating feathers of light, drifting specks of gold and ribbons of lavender. The bed was pushing through a soup of pure relaxation. It required effort to move through this thickness, which slowed the bed's progress even more. It was barely moving now, just drifting inch by inch. Time distorted in the tunnel. A minute felt like an hour. An hour felt like a second. There was no urgency. The tunnel had no end that needed to be reached quickly. The journey through the tunnel was the experience itself. Leo's dreams began to mirror his surroundings. In his mind, he wasn't just a boy in a bed. He was a seed falling slowly through the earth, waiting to rest. He was a stone sinking to the bottom of a deep, quiet lake. He was a feather falling in a vacuum. These images played across his mind's eye, soft and blurry, requiring no focus, no logic. The ceiling of the tunnel lowered slightly, creating a more enclosed, cozy feeling. It felt like being in a burrow, a secret hideaway where nothing could find him. The darkness pressed in closer, wrapping around the bed like an extra blanket. It was a protective darkness, a shield against the brightness of the day. Suddenly, the texture of the ride changed. The bed moved from floating on air to gliding on something tangible. The floor of the tunnel was covered in a thick layer of fog moss, a substance that was half gas, half solid. The bed settled onto it. The sensation was incredibly smooth, like a sled gliding over fresh, powdery snow. Hiss, glide, hiss, glide. The sound of the bed moving over the fog moss was a white noise, a static hush that filled the tunnel. It blocked out everything else. It focused Leo's entire existence on the sensation of the glide. He felt the vibration of the movement in his spine, a tiny, microscopic trembling that massaged his nervous system. He was so heavy now. If he had wanted to lift his hand, he couldn't have. His limbs felt like they were made of lead, sinking deep into the mattress. The duvet felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, pinning him down in the most wonderful way. He was trapped in comfort. The tunnel began to widen again. The ceiling rose up, disappearing into the gloom. The walls stepped back. The spiral was straightening out. They were approaching the end of the passage, leading to a new, vast cavern. Ahead, a faint, silvery light began to grow. It wasn't the light of the sun or the moon. It was the light of the silent giants that waited in the next chamber. The air grew even stiller, if that was possible. The echoes thinned out, leaving only the pure, unadulterated silence of the deep earth. Leo shifted one last time, a tiny movement of his foot, burrowing deeper into the warmth of the covers. He let out a sigh that was instantly absorbed by the velvet walls. He was ready for the next stage. He was ready to stop moving and simply be. The bed glided out of the mouth of the tunnel, leaving the embrace of the indigo walls, and drifted slowly into the vast, open, and silent expanse that lay beyond, carrying the dreaming boy into the heart of the mystery. The archipelago of plush giants. The flying bed drifted out of the mouth of the tunnel of soft echoes, carried by the last vestiges of the spiral current. As the indigo walls of the tunnel fell away, the sensation of confinement vanished, replaced instantly by a feeling of immense, breathless expansion. Leo, still deep in his lucid slumber, sensed the change in the architecture of his dream. The ceiling was gone. The walls were gone. There was only space, vast, open, and filled with a hazy, silver-blue light that seemed to have no source, but rather permeated every molecule of the air like a dissolved pearl. He had arrived in the archipelago of plush giants. This was not a place of water and rock. It was a place where the laws of geology had been replaced by the laws of comfort. Floating in the silvery void were the giants. They were not living creatures in the traditional sense, nor were they mountains. They were colossal, free-floating landmasses made entirely of soft materials. They drifted in the zero-gravity expanse like slow, massive icebergs, but where ice would be sharp and cold, these forms were rounded, bulbous, and undeniably warm. The bed glided toward the nearest giant. As it got closer, the sheer scale of the object became apparent. It was the size of a city, a towering monolith of comfort. Its surface was not dirt or stone. It was a landscape of deep, tufted velvet in a shade of rich, sleepy charcoal. It looked like a giant cushion that had been shaped by the winds of sleep into hills and valleys. Leo's bed was a speck of dust compared to this titan. He watched, mesmerized, as the shoreline of the giant approached. There were no crashing waves here. The sea around the giants was a thick, viscous mist that clung to their sides like a blanket. The bed moved through this mist, pushing aside heavy ribbons of fog that curled over the duvet before dissipating. The landscape of the giant was textured. Great ridges of folded fabric rose up like mountain ranges, creating valleys of shadow between them. Forests of thick, woolen fibers stood tall, swaying gently in the slow currents of the void. It was a world where you could fall from any height and land softly. Bump. The contact was so gentle it was barely a sensation. The flying bed nudged against the flank of the charcoal giant. It didn't bounce off. Instead, the gravity of the giant, a gravitational pull made of pure coziness, caught the bed. The mattress sank slightly into the plush surface of the giant, locking into place like a puzzle piece finding its home. The bed was now docked. It was a small boat anchored to a mothership of sleep. Leo felt the stability instantly. The slight drifting motion of the flight stopped, replaced by the massive, inertia-heavy stillness of the giant. It was a grounding feeling, as if the entire weight of this velvet mountain was now supporting his back. He looked out across the archipelago. In the distance, other giants drifted. One was a pale, creamy white, looking like a massive scoop of cloud foam. Another was a deep, midnight blue, covered in what looked like miles of soft, faux fur that rippled in waves as it turned slowly in the light. They moved with a majestic, geological slowness. Two of the distant giants were on a collision course. Leo watched, expecting a crash. But in this world, there was no violence. As the two massive, soft forms met, they didn't shatter. They merged. They pressed against each other, their soft surfaces compressing, deforming gently to accommodate the other. MMMPH. The sound of their collision traveled across the void. It was a low, muffled thud, a sound like a heavy quilt being dropped onto a bed, but magnified 1,000 times. It was a deep bass of silence, a vibration that shook the air in a pleasant, rhythmic way. The two giants rebounded slowly, spinning away from each other in a new, lazy trajectory. Leo's attention returned to the giant he was anchored to. He realized that the ground next to his bed was accessible. In his dream, he didn't need to walk. He could simply extend his awareness. He felt the texture of the giant. It was warm, retaining the heat of a sun that never set. The fibers of the velvet were thick as ropes, soft as silk. He imagined climbing out of bed and walking on this surface. Every step would sink knee-deep into the softness. It would be impossible to run here, impossible to hurry. The very ground demanded that you slow down, that you lie down, that you sink in. The air around the archipelago was different, too. It was padded air. It absorbed sound instantly. If he were to shout, the sound would travel only an inch before being soaked up by the millions of tons of softness surrounding him. This acoustic deadening was incredibly restful for his mind. It meant there were no echoes, no sharp noises, no distractions, just a pure, insulated bubble of peace. High above the horizon of the charcoal giant, a flock of pillow rays glided by. These were flat, wide creatures that looked like flying duvets. They flapped their corners slowly, riding the thermal currents rising from the warm giants. They cast large, soft shadows that swept across Leo's bed, dimming the light for a moment, creating a passing night that lasted only seconds. Leo felt a vibration coming from the giant beneath him. It wasn't a mechanical vibration. It was a purr. The giant was resonating. It was a low frequency, perhaps 20 hertz, the exact frequency of a cat's purr or the rumble of distant thunder. This vibration transferred through the hull of his flying bed, through his mattress, and into his bones. It was a massage for his skeleton, loosening the marrow, relaxing the deep muscles that hold the spine together. He burrowed deeper into his own pillows. He felt small. In the waking world, feeling small can be scary. But here, feeling small was a relief. It meant he didn't have to be in charge. The giant was in charge. The giant was billions of times larger than him, and its only purpose was to float and be soft. He could surrender all responsibility to it. A gentle snow began to fall, but it wasn't ice. Large, fluffy flakes of white cotton began to drift down from the silvery sky. They were the size of dinner plates, weightless and dry. They landed on the dark velvet of the giant, creating a speckled pattern. One landed on Leo's nose. It tickled slightly, then dissolved into a puff of warm air. The cotton snow piled up on the foot of his bed, adding another layer of weight, another layer of insulation. He watched the flakes fall. They spiraled down in slow motion, taking minutes to reach the ground. The visual rhythm of the falling snow was hypnotic. Twist, turn, drift, land. Leo felt his consciousness spreading out. He was no longer just the boy in the bed. He was becoming part of the landscape. He felt connected to the velvet ridge to his left, connected to the woolen valley to his right. He was just another feature on the surface of this massive world of rest. The giant began to rotate. The horizon tilted. The silvery sky dipped, and a field of darker, navy blue stars rose into view. The rotation was so smooth that Leo wouldn't have known he was moving if not for the changing view. It was a rocking motion on a planetary scale. Tilt and hold, tilt and return. He felt a deep, abiding gratitude for this place. It was a sanctuary built of silence and touch. It was a place where hard did not exist. There were no hard edges, no hard words, no hard decisions. Everything was pliable. Everything yielded. His breathing synced with the rotation of the giant. It was a slow cycle. Inhale as the stars rose. Exhale as the stars set. The flying bed, now securely nestled in the fur of the giant, felt like a tiny seed in a pod. Leo was protected from above by the cotton sky, protected from below by the velvet mountain, and protected on all sides by the muffled silence. He was reaching a state of stasis, a point where sleep was not just an activity, but a location. He had arrived at the center of the map. As the snow continued to fall, burying the world in fresh layers of white softness, Leo's mind finally let go of the last image of the waking world. There was no more outside. There was only the giant, the bed, and the deep, warm, endless drift. The sensation of the bed sinking just a fraction of an inch deeper into the giant signaled the end of this chapter of the journey. He was anchored. He was held. He was home. And in the shadow of the great charcoal hill, under the shower of cotton stars, Leo drifted into the deepest. most motionless sleep he had ever known, while the plush giant carried him silently through the eternal, comforting void. The loom of starlight. The flying bed remained anchored to the charcoal flank of the plush giant for what felt like a timeless season of rest. But in the dream world, stillness is just a pause between journeys. The cotton snow that had buried Leo's duvet in a layer of white softness began to sublimate, dissolving gently into mist as a warm breeze heralded a change in the current. Leo felt the deep, gravitational embrace of the giant loosen. It wasn't a rejection, but a release, a gentle push outward like a mother bird nudging a fledgling. The bed lifted slowly, separating from the velvet landscape with a soundless grace. The dark mountain of comfort receded below him, drifting away into the silvery fog until it was just a shadow, then a memory. The bed was caught in a new stream. This flow was faster, more purposeful than the lazy drift of the nebula. It was a river of energy, pulling him toward a source of immense, rhythmic light on the horizon. As Leo approached, the source resolved into a structure of breathtaking scale and complexity. It was the loom of starlight. It spanned the entire width of the cosmos, a structure not made of wood or iron, but of solidified beams of light and gravity. It looked like a giant harp or a majestic grid standing against the black backdrop of deep space. Vertical pillars of white light stretched from the bottom of the universe to the top, forming the warp of the great loom. Between these pillars, millions of threads were being woven. Leo's bed drifted closer, slowing down as it entered the outer perimeter of the loom's influence. The air here vibrated with a steady, mechanical pulse. It was the heartbeat of creation. Hum, click, hum, click. The sound was low and resonant, a soothing percussion that seemed to set the tempo for Leo's own heart. He watched, fascinated, as the raw material of the cosmos was processed. To his left, he saw streams of chaotic stardust, wild, swirling clouds of gold and silver gas being funneled into the machinery of the loom. The stardust passed through spinning wheels of crystal, which twisted the gas, compressing it, spinning it tighter and tighter until it transformed. It became thread. Miles of glowing, silk-like filament emerged from the spinning wheels. It was the thread of dreams. It shimmered with an iridescent sheen, changing color as it moved, from pale lavender to deep midnight blue, from silver to soft charcoal. The threads were then fed into the main body of the loom. A massive shuttle, shaped like a sleek, silver comet, moved back and forth across the vertical beams of light. Swish, the shuttle glided left talk, the weave tightened swish. The shuttle glided right talk, the weave tightened. The motion was perfectly smooth, perfectly repetitive. It was the ultimate lullaby of motion. Leo lay on his side, his eyes tracking the shuttle. Left, right, left, right. The repetition was heavy on his eyelids. It forced his brain to synchronize with the rhythm, washing away any erratic thoughts, leaving only the steady, predictable pattern of the weave. The bed floated right into the center of the operation. He wasn't afraid of being crushed. The loom was ethereal. The threads passed through the walls of his bed, through his duvet, through his very body. He could feel them. They didn't hurt. They felt like warm beams of sunlight passing through him. As the threads passed through him, he felt a sensation of being knitted together. It felt as if the fragmented parts of his mind, the worries, the questions, the active thoughts, were being caught by the threads and woven into a single, smooth fabric of peace. The tension in his muscles was pulled out, spun into the design, and replaced with structural relaxation. He looked up at the fabric being created above him. It was a tapestry of infinite beauty. It was the night sky itself. The loom was weaving the curtain of night that would cover the world. He saw patterns emerging in the cloth, swirls of galaxies, dots of stars, the flowing lines of auroras. It was a blanket for the universe, and he was watching it being made. The sound of the loom was all-encompassing. It was a symphony of friction and release. The hiss of the thread sliding against the light beams, the soft thump of the comb pressing the weave down. It was a white noise that was rich and textured. Leo noticed that the weavers were there, too. They were not people, but forms of pure energy, silhouettes of soft, blue light that moved along the threads, checking for knots, smoothing out imperfections. One of the weavers drifted near Leo. It reached out a hand made of light and brushed it over Leo's forehead. The touch was cool and smooth, like the back of a spoon. It smoothed out the furrow in his brow. "Sleep," the gesture seemed to say. "We are weaving a dream just for you." The bed continued to drift parallel to the fabric. Leo reached out and touched the cloth of starlight. It felt stronger than steel but softer than spiderweb. It vibrated under his fingers, humming with the energy of a billion stars. He realized that his own bedsheets were made of this same material. He pulled the duvet closer to his chin. He was wrapped in starlight. He was swaddled in the work of the loom. The rhythm deepened. Swish. Talk. The intervals seemed to stretch. The shuttle moved slower now, as if the machine itself was getting sleepy. The colors of the threads deepened, shifting from the bright golds of the weaving process to the deep, restful indigos of the finished product. The light in the loom began to dim. The bright white pillars faded to a soft, glowing gray. The work was winding down. The tapestry was finished for the night. Leo felt a profound sense of completion. Everything was in its place. Every thread was tied off. Every knot was secure. There was nothing left to be done. The universe was tidy and whole. His flying bed began to drift toward the exit of the loom, the place where the finished fabric flowed out like a waterfall of night. The bed rode the fabric, sliding down the smooth, silky surface of the giant tapestry. It was a long, gentle slide into the dark. The rhythmic click-clack of the loom faded behind him, turning into a distant, comforting heartbeat. He was moving away from the noise of creation into the silence of the result. The air grew warmer again, thicker. The smell of ozone and electricity from the spinning wheels was replaced by the scent of warm milk and honey. Leo felt heavy, so incredibly heavy. He felt as though he had been woven into the mattress, stitched into the moment. He couldn't move if he wanted to, and he didn't want to. He closed his eyes, but the image of the weaving remained. The endless, comforting back-and-forth motion. It rocked him from the inside. Left, right, in, out, sleep, deep. The bed floated free from the loom, trailing a few loose strands of glowing silk that dissolved into the darkness. He was drifting now in the finished night, the product of the great machine. It was perfect. It was still. It was his. Leo surrendered the last of his awareness to the memory of the rhythm. The loom had done its work. It had spun him a cocoon of safety, and now, wrapped in the fresh, warm fabric of the cosmos, he drifted on, ready for the next wonder, ready for the deep, golden silence that awaited him. The River of Molten Gold. The flying bed drifted away from the loom of starlight, leaving behind the rhythmic click-clack of the cosmic machinery and the cool, crisp scent of ozone. The darkness of the open void began to change once more, but this time, it was not a shift in color, but a shift in density. The air grew heavier, richer. It began to carry a scent that was sweet and earthy, reminiscent of warm caramel, toasted sugar, and ancient pine resin baking in the summer sun. Leo, wrapped tightly in his duvet woven from starlight, felt the temperature rising. It was a gentle, pervasive heat that started at the foot of the bed and slowly crept upward, thawing the cool stillness left by the loom. It was the feeling of opening an oven door on a cold winter day, a wave of comfort that made his skin tingle pleasantly. The bed began to descend. It was losing altitude, dropping down from the high, airy heights of the Weavers into a deep, subterranean canyon that cut through the bedrock of the dream world. As the bed lowered, the darkness below began to glow. It wasn't the sharp, white light of stars. It was a deep, resonant, yellow-orange radiance. Leo drifted down until the bed hovered just inches above the surface of a magnificent liquid expanse. He had arrived at the River of Molten Gold. This was not water. It did not flow with the frantic energy of a mountain stream, nor did it crash or splash. This river was made of liquid light, a substance as thick and viscous as warm honey or molten glass. It glowed from within, illuminating the high canyon walls with a flickering, burnished light. The bed touched down. There was no impact. The mattress met the surface of the gold with a slow, sinking sensation. The thick liquid accepted the weight of the bed gradually, cushioning it, cradling it. The bed didn't bob up and down. It settled deep into the fluid, moving with the heavy, sluggish grace of a ship in syrup. Leo rolled to the edge of the bed and looked down. The river was mesmerizing. It was a swirling tapestry of amber, bronze, and deep, rich gold. He could see currents moving beneath the surface, slow, languid ribbons of heat twisting and turning over one another. It looked heavy. It looked like if you were to touch it, your hand would be coated in warmth. He reached a hand out from under the covers. He extended his fingers toward the glowing surface. He didn't be afraid. In this world, heat was never burning, only healing. His fingertips grazed the surface of the river. The sensation was exquisite. It felt like touching liquid silk or warm, melted wax. The river offered resistance against his fingers, a pleasant drag that told him how dense it was. He trailed his hand through the gold as the bed began to move downstream. The wake his fingers created didn't ripple quickly. It folded over itself in slow, heavy layers, like batter being stirred in a bowl. The current here was agonizingly slow. The river moved with the pace of a glacier, a deliberate, majestic crawl toward an unknown ocean. This slowness permeated everything. The shadows on the walls moved slowly. The air moved slowly. Leo's own thoughts moved slowly, seemingly trapped in the amber of the moment. The canyon walls that rose on either side were made of fool's gold, pyrite. They glittered in the light of the river, reflecting the warm glow back down onto the traveler. The geometry of the rocks was cubic and sharp, but the light softened them, turning the cliffs into walls of treasure. Leo pulled his hand back and wiped it on the sheet. The river left no wetness, only a lingering sensation of heat that seeped into his bones. He rolled onto his back and looked up. The top of the canyon was so high it was lost in shadow, creating a ceiling of privacy. He was alone in this golden trench, hidden away from the rest of the universe. The sound of the river was the deepest sound he had ever heard. It wasn't a roar. It was a drone, a low, continuous vibration that resonated in the base of his skull. Huyuamum. It was the sound of the Earth's core, a sound that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his nervous system, telling it to shut down, to power off. As the bed drifted further, the river widened. In the center of the flow, Leo saw large shapes drifting along with him. They were golden lotuses, flowers the size of cars, floating on the surface of the thick liquid. Their petals were made of hammered gold foil, thin and delicate. In the center of each flower burned a small, smokeless flame. The bed bumped gently against one of the lotuses. The flower spun slowly, its golden petals brushing against the side of the mattress with a sound like dry leaves. Rustle. Hush. The contact sent a tiny ripple through the bed, rocking Leo ever so slightly. He felt heavy. The visual weight of the gold, the thickness of the air, the density of the river, it all combined to press him down into the mattress. He felt as though gravity had doubled, but in the most comfortable way possible. His arms felt like they were made of stone. His eyelids felt like they were made of lead. He tried to lift his head to look ahead, but the effort seemed too great and, frankly, unnecessary. There was nothing he needed to see. The view was the same everywhere, warm, golden, peaceful. He let his head sink back into the pillow, which felt cooler now in contrast to the warm air. The heat of the river was doing its work. It was melting the tension in his muscles. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, his fingers uncurled. He felt like a piece of chocolate left in the sun, softening, losing his shape, spreading out to become one with the surface he lay upon. Under the surface of the slow-moving river, he saw shadows of movement. Great, long shapes swimming in the depths. They were the keepers of the gold, massive, serpent-like creatures made of pure energy. They swam without effort, their bodies undulating in the thick fluid. They never broke the surface. They just glided below, silent guardians ensuring the flow continued its eternal, sluggish journey. The bed drifted around a long, lazy bend in the canyon. Here, the walls were closer, reflecting the heat back intensely. It was a sauna of sleep. The air was misty with golden vapor rising from the river. The mist hung over the bed, dampening the light, turning the world into a soft, blurry haze of yellow and orange. Leo took a deep breath. The air tasted rich and sweet. It filled his lungs with warmth, heating him from the inside out. With every exhale, he felt himself sinking deeper. He wasn't just on the bed anymore. He felt as though he were sinking through the bed, sinking into the river itself, becoming suspended in the warm, golden suspension. A drip of liquid gold fell from a stalactite high above. Leo watched it fall. It took seconds to descend. It hit the surface of the river. Bloop. The sound was thick and hollow. The rings of the impact spread out slowly, perfect circles of light expanding until they faded into the flow. He closed his eyes. The orange glow of the river was so bright he could see it through his eyelids. It was a warm, comforting curtain of color. He focused on the sensation of the drift. The bed was moving, but barely. It was the definition of languid. He felt the slight rotation as the bed turned in an eddy. Turn and stop, turn and stop. His mind tried to form a thought, a question about where the river went, but the thought was too heavy to hold. It slipped away, sinking into the gold like a stone. He was left with only sensations: heat, heaviness, slow motion. The drone of the river seemed to be getting louder, or perhaps he was just tuning into it more. It became the only reality. It was a blanket of sound that covered him, tucking him in. He was a nugget of gold returning to the vein. He was a drop of honey returning to the jar. He was a boy returning to the silence. The bed glided under a natural archway of rock, entering a tunnel where the light dimmed to a deep, burnished bronze. The shadows lengthened. The heat remained, but the visual stimulation was fading. It was the perfect transition. Leo lay absolutely still, his breathing shallow and slow, his heart rate matching the slow, rhythmic pulse of the molten river. He was suspended in amber, preserved in peace, drifting deeper and deeper into the golden, timeless dark. The chamber of suspended time. The River of Molten Gold, which had carried Leo with such heavy, languid grace through the canyon of pyrite, began to change yet again. The current, already slow, barely registered now. The friction of the golden fluid against the hull of the flying bed diminished until it vanished completely. The bed was no longer sliding. It was drifting on pure inertia, gliding across a surface that had become as smooth and flat as a polished mirror. They passed through the archway of bronze rock and emerged into a space so vast that the ceiling was lost in a haze of indigo twilight. This was the chamber of suspended time. As Leo looked around, blinking his heavy eyelids, he realized that something fundamental had shifted. The drone of the river was gone. The rustle of the golden lotuses was gone. In fact, all sound was gone. But it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a paused record player. The bed drifted toward the center of a great circular lake, but the water of the lake was not rippling. It was perfectly, glassily still. Leo looked over the edge. His reflection looked back at him, unmoving, sharp, and perfect. There was not a single tremor to distort the image. Then he saw the waterfall. At the far end of the cavern, a massive cascade of silver water poured down from the rocks above. But it wasn't pouring. It was frozen in time. It looked like a magnificent sculpture made of blown glass and diamond. The water was caught in mid-fall, a curtain of chaotic beauty rendered suddenly static. At the base of the falls, where the water usually crashed into the lake, the spray was suspended in the air. Millions of individual droplets hung in the void, defying gravity. They glittered in the ambient light like a cloud of sequins. Some were tiny, like mist. Others were large, perfect spheres the size of marbles, capturing the reflection of the cavern upside down within them. Leo's bed drifted closer to this field of suspended spray. He reached out a hand. His fingers brushed against one of the floating water droplets. It didn't splash. It didn't burst. It simply bobbed away gently, like a balloon nudged by a breeze before settling back into its fixed position. It felt cool and firm, like a grape made of water. He looked up. Above the lake, a flock of birds, silvertails, had been flying across the cavern when the time stop occurred. They were frozen in mid-flight, their wings extended in various stages of the beat. One was banking left, its feathers splayed to catch the air. Another was diving. They looked like intricate origami decorations hung on invisible wires. Their eyes were open, bright, and peaceful. They weren't dead, they were simply waiting, resting in the moment. The air in the chamber was crystalline. Without the chaotic movement of atoms that creates wind and heat, the atmosphere had achieved a terrifyingly beautiful clarity. Leo could see the texture of the rock walls miles away. He could see the individual veins on the leaves of the vines that hung motionless from the stalactites. Dust motes danced in a beam of light that cut through the darkness, or rather, they should have been dancing. Instead, they were stuck. A galaxy of tiny golden specks hung in the beam, creating a solid pillar of light. Leo realized he could count them if he wanted to. 1, 2, 3, a million tiny stars that had stopped wandering. The sensation of being in this room was profound. It removed the anxiety of what comes next. In the chamber of suspended time, there was no next. There was only now. The pressure to finish things, to go places, to grow up, to wake up, it all evaporated. If time wasn't moving, he couldn't be late. He couldn't miss anything. He was free to exist in this singular, perfect second for as long as he needed. His bed drifted slowly through the field of floating water droplets. They parted around the mattress and then closed in behind it, resuming their silent vigil. Leo looked at the far wall of the chamber. Carved into the rock face was a colossal clock face. It was ancient, its surface made of mother-of-pearl and brass, but the clock had no hands. The numbers were there, Roman numerals etched in gold, but the mechanism that tracked the passing of seconds was missing. It was a monument to the irrelevance of time. Below the clock, a pendulum hung from a long brass rod. It was a heavy, golden disc. It hung perfectly straight, motionless at the bottom of its arc. It had swung down and simply decided not to swing back up. It was resting. Leo felt a deep resonance with that pendulum. He felt the gravity pulling him down, centering him. He lay back on his pillows, aligning his body with the stillness of the room. His breathing seemed loud in this quiet place, but even that began to slow down to match the environment. The pause between his inhale and his exhale grew longer. Inhale. Pause. 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 Exhale. Pause. 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 He felt as though his heart was beating slower, too. Not stopping, but lengthening its rhythm, taking its time to push the warm blood through his veins. Thump. Thump. The light in the chamber was a steady, unchanging twilight. It wasn't getting darker, and it wasn't getting lighter. It was the magic hour, caught and pinned to the wall like a butterfly. It was the color of relaxation, a soft purple gray that was easy on the eyes. Leo watched a single leaf that had fallen from a vine high above. It was suspended a few feet above the surface of the lake. It was curled and brown, beautiful in its decay. It hovered there, forever about to land, forever postponing the end of its journey. He realized that he was the only moving thing in this entire world, and even he was barely moving. The inertia of his bed was fading. It was slowing down, preparing to join the stasis of the room. The heavy duvet felt like a casing of stone, but soft stone. It pinned him to the mattress. He felt safe. Nothing could change here. Nothing could surprise him. The world was a painting, and he was the observer who had stepped inside the frame. He stared at the frozen waterfall again. He imagined the sound it would make if it were flowing, a roar of white noise. But the absence of that sound was louder. The silence was a physical weight, pressing against his ears, muffling his thoughts. "Stop," the room whispered without words. "Just stop." Leo's mind obeyed. The train of thought that usually chugged through his head slowed its wheels, braking gently until it came to a halt. The thoughts didn't disappear. They just sat there, quiet and still like the frozen birds. He looked at the suspended water droplets one last time. They glittered like stars brought down to earth. They were beautiful because they were still. They were perfect because they weren't trying to go anywhere. The bed finally came to a complete stop in the center of the glassy lake. It didn't drift anymore. It became part of the tableau. Leo closed his eyes. The image of the frozen waterfall remained on the back of his eyelids, a pillar of diamond light. He felt the absolute stability of the moment. He was locked in time, safe from the morning, safe from the future. He floated there, a boy suspended in the amber of eternity, resting in the gap between seconds, deep in the heart of the stopped world. The Velvet Clocktower. The flying bed drifted closer to the colossal clock face carved into the rock wall of the chamber of suspended time. Up close, the Roman numerals were not merely etchings. They were towering archways, balconies of brass and mother-of-pearl that jutted out into the twilight. The bed floated toward the numeral Roman 12, the position of midnight, the gateway to the deepest rest. As the bed approached, the panels of the number 12 slid open silently, revealing a hollow interior. It wasn't a dark hole. It was a warm, dimly lit shaft that smelled of cedarwood, old wool, and drying lavender. The bed glided through the opening, passing from the frozen, open air of the cavern into the enclosed, cozy mechanics of the Velvet Clocktower. Inside, the space was a vertical labyrinth of machinery, but it was machinery reimagined by a dream. There were no sharp cogs of steel, no grinding pistons, no dripping oil. This was a clockwork universe built entirely of soft materials. Leo looked up into the towering shaft. The gears were massive, some the size of Ferris wheels, interlocking in a complex dance. But these gears were cut from thick, compressed industrial felt and dense, heavy wool. They were colored in muted tones, heather gray, dusty slate, and warm taupe. Whump, shhh. The sound of the gears turning was barely audible. When the teeth of one felt gear meshed with another, there was no metallic clack. Instead, there was a soft, muffled thud, a sound of heavy fabric pressing against heavy fabric. It was a rhythmic, dull friction that felt incredibly satisfying to watch. It was the sound of a heavy blanket being folded, repeated over and over. Whump, shhh, whump, shhh. The bed began to float upward, carried by a gentle updraft of warm air rising from the base of the tower. Leo lay on his back, watching the workings of the clock pass by. He passed a spring mechanism. In a normal clock, this would be a tight coil of tensioned steel. Here, it was a gigantic ribbon of deep purple velvet, wound tightly around a spool of polished mahogany. As the clock operated, the ribbon slowly, agonizingly slowly, unspooled. It didn't release energy, it released relaxation. As the velvet unwound, it draped softly over the gears below, cushioning them, adding another layer of softness to the machine. Leo reached out as the bed drifted near a passing cog. The surface of the gear was fuzzy, covered in soft lanolin wool. It looked warm. Dust motes danced around it, caught in the static electricity of the moving fabric. The gear turned so slowly that Leo could track a single fiber of wool as it made its rotation. The lubrication for this machine was not grease. It was fine, silver dust, moon powder, that sprinkled down from hoppers above. The dust coated the felt gears, making them glide against each other in total silence. The air sparkled with this falling powder. It settled on Leo's duvet, adding a faint shimmer to the white linen. Higher up, the mechanism changed. Instead of gears, there were systems of pulleys and weights. The ropes were thick, braided cords of silk, golden and strong. The weights that drove the clock were not blocks of lead, but large, sand-filled sacks made of burlap and satin. Leo watched one of the sandbags slowly descend past him. It was heavy, settling with a palpable sense of gravity. It looked like a giant beanbag. He imagined how it would feel to hug it, heavy, shifting, and conforming to the body. The purpose of this machine became clear to Leo. It wasn't measuring time. It was crushing it. The soft gears were grinding down the sharp edges of the day, pulverizing the hard minutes into a soft, amorphous powder of sleep. The clock didn't ask, "What time is it?" It asked, "How soft is it?" The bed drifted through a section of the tower where the chimes hung. In a normal clock tower, these would be massive bronze bells that would ring out across the city. Here, the bells were made of blown glass, filled with colored smoke, and the hammers that struck them were padded with thick balls of cotton. Duff. A hammer struck a bell. There was no ringing peal, just a low, resonant vibration that hummed through the air, a frequency that resonated in Leo's chest. It was a thud of sound that absorbed other noises. It was a chime of silence. Duff. Leo felt the vibration in his teeth, in his bones. It was a grounding wave. It told his body to let go. The bed navigated around a massive, rotating spindle wrapped in yarn. The yarn was endless, a thread of dreams being spun into the structure of the night. The spindle turned with a hypnotic wobble. Wub, wub, wub. Leo felt insulated. The walls of the tower were lined with shelves of books and folded quilts, acting as soundproofing. He was inside a fortress of soft things. The outside world, the frozen lake, the molten river, the star loom, felt miles away. Here, it was just him and the slow, fuzzy churning of the machine. He passed a maintenance platform where a small automaton sat. It wasn't a robot of metal, but a construct of wood and cloth, like a marionette without strings. It was slowly brushing one of the felt gears with a soft bristled brush, cleaning away the excess moon dust. It didn't look up as Leo passed. It was focused on its simple, repetitive task. Brush, pause, brush, pause. The higher Leo rose, the dimmer the light became. The warm amber of the lower levels faded into a deep, restful indigo. The gears here were made of darker materials, navy blue wool, black velvet. They blended into the shadows, their movement visible only by the way they blocked the faint starlight filtering from above. The sound of the machine grew quieter, too. The wumpsh faded to a mere whisper of texture. The air became still. The updraft that carried the bed slowed down, depositing him gently onto a landing at the very top of the mechanism. This was the belfry of the Velvet Tower. But instead of open arches looking out over a loud city, the windows were covered with thick, translucent tapestries that glowed faintly with the light of the moon outside. The center of the room was dominated by the balance wheel. It was a huge, horizontal ring of polished wood, lined with fur, rocking back and forth. Tick, rock left, talk, rock right. But the tick and talk were soft, like a finger tapping on a pillow. The rhythm was incredibly slow, roughly 10 seconds between each movement. Leo's bed settled on the floor of the belfry, which was covered in a carpet so deep it almost swallowed the legs of the bed. He lay there, listening to the slow heartbeat of the tower. Tick, talk. He felt entirely synchronized with it. His own internal clock had been reset. The urgency of life had been dismantled by the felt gears, crushed by the sandbags, and smoothed by the velvet ribbons. He looked up at the ceiling of the tower. It was a conical roof, the inside lined with dark fabric pinned with tiny crystals to mimic the stars. But these stars didn't move. They were fixed, constant, and close. Leo curled up, pulling the duvet over his head, leaving only a small breathing hole. He felt like he was hiding in the safest place in the universe, inside the works of a clock that had forgotten how to rush. The vibration of the heavy machinery below was a distant, comforting rumble now, like the engine of a ship deep below deck. It was the sound of something else doing the work, so he didn't have to. He closed his eyes. In the darkness of the belfry, the soft rhythm was the only thing left. Soft, slow, still. And Leo slept, cradled in the gears of the night, protected by the tower that stood guard over the end of time. The dust mote galaxy. The velvet machinery of the clocktower continued its silent, stationary vigil beneath him, a monument to a time that had ceased to matter. Leo lay in the belfry, shielded from the cosmos by the heavy tapestries that covered the windows. But nature, even dream nature, always finds a way to enter. Through a microscopic tear in the thick fabric of the curtains, a single beam of light pierced the darkness of the room. It was a solid shaft of luminescence, cutting through the shadows like a blade of pale gold. It wasn't blinding. It was hazy, distinct, and filled with a slow, swirling chaos of particles. Leo watched the beam from his bed. He saw the dust motes dancing within it. In the waking world, these are just specks of dirt. But here, in the high tower of sleep, Leo saw them for what they truly were, tiny, drifting worlds. They spiraled and floated, rising on invisible thermals, sinking in pockets of cool air, colliding gently and bouncing apart. As he stared at the dance of the dust, a strange sensation washed over him. The bed beneath him seemed to expand. The ceiling of the belfry seemed to rise, higher and higher, until it disappeared into a vast cavern of shadow. The beam of light grew wider, becoming a highway of radiance that spanned the entire horizon. Leo realized he wasn't looking at the dust anymore. He was joining it. He was shrinking, or perhaps the universe was growing. It happened seamlessly, without fear. His body felt lighter, shedding its density, shedding its weight. He floated up from the mattress, no longer a boy of flesh and bone, but a speck of consciousness, light as a feather, small as a grain of pollen. He drifted into the beam of light. Suddenly, he was inside the dust mote galaxy. The space around him was a vast, golden cathedral of air. The dust motes were now colossal, drifting islands the size of houses. They were not jagged or dirty. They were made of soft, fibrous materials, bits of lint from the cloak of night, fragments of stardust, tiny tufts of celestial cotton. They glowed in the light of the beam, radiant and warm. Leo drifted toward one of these islands. It looked like a tumbleweed made of golden silk. He reached out, his arms now spectral and light, and grabbed onto a stray fiber. He pulled himself aboard. The surface of the dust island was springy and porous. He lay down on it. It rocked gently under his weight, spinning slowly in the air current. He was a passenger on a wandering star. From his vantage point on the mote, Leo looked out at the galaxy. It was a crowded, silent ballet. Millions of other islands drifted around him. Some were moving up, carried by a warm draft. Some were drifting down, settling towards the darkness below. Twist, turn, drift. The laws of physics here were dictated by air resistance and fluid dynamics. Everything moved in curves. Nothing moved in a straight line. It was the geometry of randomness, the pattern of pure relaxation. Leo felt the air currents pushing against his island. It was a gentle pressure, like a hand guiding him. Whoosh! The sound of the air was a low, constant whisper, the white noise of the atmosphere itself. He floated past a giant dust mote that looked like a shard of diamond. It caught the light of the beam and refracted it, sending rainbows of color splashing across the golden void. Leo watched a band of red light wash over his arms, then orange, then yellow. It was a slow scan of color, warming him. He realized that time here was even slower than in the clock tower. For a dust mote, a second is a lifetime. A single rotation took forever. He was living in the space between the ticks of the clock. He rolled over on his fibrous raft and looked down. Below the beam of light lay the abyss of shadow, the floor of the belfry, now miles away. It looked like a deep, dark ocean, but he wasn't afraid of falling. In this form, falling was just flying in a different direction. Air was thick enough to swim in. A neighbor mote drifted close. It was a sphere of gray fuzz looking soft and dense. It bumped into Leo's island. Boop. The collision was silent and elastic. The two motes compressed against each other, sharing their momentum, then slowly pushed apart, spinning in opposite directions. The interaction was polite, gentle, a cosmic high five of softness. Leo felt a profound sense of insignificance, but it was the most liberating feeling he had ever known. He didn't have to be Leo anymore. He didn't have to be a student, a son, a friend. He didn't have a name. He was just a speck, a tiny floating point of view. The beam of light began to curve, bending around the invisible architecture of the room. Leo's island followed the flow. He was surfing the light. The warmth of the beam penetrated the core of his dust draft, radiating up into him. It was a dry, dusty heat, smelling of old attics and sun-baked wood. He saw other things floating in the beam, tiny micro-feathers, shed from the wings of the silvertails in the cave below. They looked like white skiffs, sailing elegantly through the gold. He saw a single strand of spiderweb, a long, silver cable stretching for miles, undulating like a snake. Leo closed his eyes, or closed whatever perceived sight in this form. He focused on the sensation of suspension. He was held up by the air. He was completely untethered. No gravity to pull him down, no responsibilities to pull him back. The random motion of the air rocked him, up a little, left a little, spin a little, down a little. It was the ultimate cradle. The Brownian motion of the universe was rocking him to sleep. His thoughts became as light and scattered as the dust around him. They didn't connect to form sentences. They were just images: gold, soft, spin, warm. He felt the beam of light beginning to fade. The sun outside the tower was setting, or perhaps the curtain was closing. The gold turned to copper, then to bronze. The islands around him dimmed, turning into silhouettes against the darkening air. As the light failed, the temperature dropped just a fraction, becoming a cool, refreshing stillness. The thermal currents slowed down. The dance of the galaxy was coming to an end. The motes began to settle. Leo's island began a long, slow descent. It was drifting down towards the darkness, towards the soft carpet of the belfry floor far below. But the descent was so slow it felt like hovering. He didn't fight it. He let the darkness come up to meet him. He let the motion slow until he was barely moving. He was a dust mote finding its resting place for the night. Suspended in the cooling air, surrounded by millions of silent brothers and sisters, Leo surrendered to the flow of the microscopic night, drifting down, down, down into the waiting arms of the void. The plains of white velvet. The golden beam of light that had sustained the dust mote galaxy had long since faded, retreating back through the heavy tapestries of the clocktower. The vibrant dance of the millions of floating islands had slowed to a standstill. Leo, riding his tiny raft of golden lint, drifted through the cooling twilight, descending deeper into the shadows of the belfry. The sensation of falling was not frightening. It was a gentle lowering, like a feather released from a hand, swaying side to side in the quiet air. Left, right, lower, lower. The darkness below was not an abyss. As Leo approached it, he saw that it was a surface, but it wasn't a floor of wood or stone. It was a landscape of pure, unblemished white. He touched down. There was no sound of impact, no vibration. It was simply a cessation of movement. His tiny raft met the surface and merged with it. Leo felt the transition instantly. He was no longer floating in the air. He was resting on something solid, yet infinitely yielding. He had arrived at the plains of white velvet. It was a world without features. As far as his consciousness could extend, there was nothing but this soft, pale expanse. It wasn't snow, it wasn't cold. It wasn't cloud, it was substantial. It was a texture of absolute softness, a material woven from the essence of silence itself. Leo, or the point of awareness that used to be Leo, settled into this landscape. The concept of having a body began to fade. He didn't feel arms or legs anymore. He felt only the sensation of contact. He was a weight resting on a cushion that extended forever. The light here was unique. It didn't come from a sun or a moon. The white velvet itself seemed to emit a faint, low-level glow, a milky luminescence that banished all shadows. In this world, there was no contrast. There were no hard edges to look at. There was nothing to focus the eyes on. If he looked left, he saw white. If he looked right, he saw white. If he looked up, the darkness of the tower had vanished, replaced by a ceiling of soft, gray mist that hung low over the plains. This lack of visual stimulation was a relief. The part of his brain that processed images, shapes, colors, movement began to power down. There was no need to interpret anything. There were no threats, no rewards, no puzzles, just the blank, comforting slate of the plains. A gentle breeze moved across the surface of the velvet. It ruffled the fibers of the landscape, creating waves of motion that traveled slowly toward the horizon. Swish, shhh. The sound was like the ocean heard from miles away, or the sound of blood rushing in one's own ears. It was a white noise made physical. Leo felt the waves pass underneath him. He rose and fell with them, a tiny ship on a solid ocean. Rise and fall, rise and fall. The rhythm was incredibly slow, synchronized with the deepest delta waves of sleep. The landscape was breathing. The entire world was expanding and contracting in a slow, metabolic slumber. He realized that he was sinking, not into water or quicksand, but sinking into comfort. The white velvet rose up around him, creating a shallow depression, a nest that fit him perfectly. It swaddled him. The more he relaxed, the deeper he sank. He tried to remember where he had come from. The clock tower, the river, the library. Those memories felt distant now, like stories read in a book long ago. They were fading, their colors washing out, leaving only the feeling of peace they had provided. The details were gone. Only the sensation remained. The air on the plains was still and neutral. It had no scent. It had no temperature. It was simply there, a medium for existence. Leo breathed it in. It felt clean, empty of pollen or dust. It was the air of emptiness. As he lay there, the white landscape began to blur. The distinction between the ground and the air, between the velvet and the mist, began to dissolve. The horizon line, which had been a faint gray blur, vanished completely. Leo was now floating in a void of white. Up, down, left, right, it was all the same. He was suspended in a cloud of cotton wool. This was the white room of the mind, the place you go right before the final curtain falls. It is a place of cleaning, a place where the clutter of the day is swept away, leaving a clean, empty space for the night. Thoughts drifted by like pale ghosts. Did I lock the door? The thought dissolved into mist. What time is it? The thought sank into the velvet. I need to. The sentence broke apart and floated away. There was nothing to hold on to. And that was the point. You cannot bring baggage into the plains of white velvet. You have to leave it at the border. Leo let go. He unclasped his mental hands. He let the thoughts fall. They dropped away from him, disappearing into the white depth below. He felt lighter with every dropped thought. He was just a vibration now, a slow, steady hum in the white. Mum. The mist lowered, wrapping him in a damp, cool embrace. It touched his face with moisture, sealing his eyes shut. Not that he needed them. There was nothing to see but the back of his own eyelids, which were now a canvas of swirling gray and black. The silence deepened. It became a heavy, physical presence. It pressed against his ears like pillows. It filled the space between the atoms. It was a silence so profound that he could hear the sound of his own existence, the faint, rhythmic pulse of life slowing down to its minimum viable tempo. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for this nothingness. In a world full of noise and data, this empty white plane was the greatest luxury. It was a pause button for the soul. He was safe, he was hidden, he was blank. The texture of the velvet beneath him smoothed out. The waves stopped. The world became a flat, still pane of glass. Leo lay there, a speck of consciousness on the edge of oblivion, waiting for the final transition. The white was beginning to fade now, darkening at the edges. The gray mist was turning to charcoal. The transition from the white canvas to the black void was beginning. He didn't fight it. He welcomed the dark. The white had cleansed him, the dark would keep him. And so, on the endless, silent plains of white velvet, Leo drifted toward the edge of the light, ready to step off into the deep, warm, shadowless night. The heartbeat of the void. The white mist of the velvet plains did not vanish instantly. It retreated slowly, like a tide pulling back from the shore, taking the light with it. Leo, resting in his shallow nest of softness, watched the grayscale creep in at the edges of his awareness. The milky luminescence that had bathed him in clarity began to dim, turning to the color of ash, then charcoal, then the deep, rich indigo of the deepest ocean trench. And finally, the light was gone. It wasn't a frightening darkness. It wasn't the darkness of a locked room or a moonless forest. It was the velvet dark. It was a substance, a physical presence that descended upon him like a heavy, warm duvet made of midnight itself. It filled his eyes, his ears, his mind. It wrapped around him, sealing him in a capsule of absolute privacy. Leo felt the boundaries of his body dissolving. In the light, he had a shape, arms, legs, a head. But in the velvet dark, those definitions melted away. He could no longer tell where his skin ended and the universe began. The darkness pressed against him with a gentle, hydrostatic pressure, equal on all sides, holding him together, holding him still. He was no longer a boy, nor a dust mote, nor a cloud. He was simply a point of warmth floating in the infinite. Without sight, his other senses became tuned to the subtle frequencies of the void. And then he felt it. A thump, thump. It started as a vibration in the fabric of the dark. A slow, tectonic pulse that came from everywhere at once. It rose from the depths below. It descended from the heights above. It was the heartbeat of the void. Thump, thump, pause, thump, thump. It was incredibly slow, slower than a whale's heart, slower than the turning of the seasons. It was the rhythm of the universe sleeping. Leo felt the rhythm entering him. It resonated in the center of his chest, overriding his own small, human heartbeat. His pulse slowed down to match the giant drum of the dark. Sink, sink, sink. With every beat, a wave of relaxation washed through the darkness. Thump, a wave of heaviness rolls over him. Thump, a wave of warmth soaks into him. The darkness felt thick, like warm oil or molasses. Leo felt as though he were suspended in it, preserved in amber. There was no gravity here. He wasn't falling anymore. He wasn't rising. He was neutrally buoyant, held perfectly in place by the density of the night. He tried to think of a word, any word. Sky! But the word felt too sharp, too bright. It dissolved instantly in the dark fluid. He tried to think of a number. 1. But the number shattered into silence. The void did not allow concepts. It only allowed being. He drifted in this heavy suspension. Occasionally, a ripple would pass through the darkness, a current of sleep. It would gently rock him, rock left, slow, rock right, slow. It was the oldest motion in the world. The sway of the cradle, the swell of the sea, the orbit of the moon. It told his primitive brain that he was safe, that he was held, that he was loved by the silence. The temperature was perfect. It was the temperature of blood, the temperature of the womb. He felt enveloped in a heat that was neither internal nor external. He was part of the heat. The silence here was not just the absence of noise. It was an active silence. It hummed, a low, barely perceptible frequency that acted like a shield. It pushed away the waking world. It pushed away the morning. It created a fortress of quiet that was impenetrable. Leo let go of the last tension in his jaw. It unhinged, relaxing completely. He let go of the tension behind his eyes. They rolled back gently, looking into the soothing black. He let go of the tension in his hands. They opened, fingers curling naturally, grasping nothing but the dark. He was a seed buried deep in the earth, waiting for a winter that would last 1,000 years. He was a stone resting at the bottom of the deepest canyon in the ocean. He was a star that had finally burned through all its fuel and was settling down to rest as a cold, peaceful cinder. A thump, thump, a thump, thump. The pauses between the beats grew longer. The silence stretched. Leo floated in the gaps between the beats. In those gaps, time didn't exist. He could stay in the gap forever. He felt a deep, magnetic pull dragging him down. Not a physical pull, but a consciousness pull. It was the gravity of delta sleep. It was pulling his mind down from the surface waves of thought, down through the layers of dreams, toward the solid bedrock of unconsciousness. He sank deeper into the velvet dark. The darkness seemed to thicken, turning from fluid to solid. He was becoming fossilized in comfort. "Let go," the heartbeat whispered. "I have you," the darkness whispered. "Sleep," the void whispered. Leo obeyed. He didn't have the strength to refuse, nor the desire. The seduction of the deep was too strong. He felt a final wave of heavy, golden numbness start at his toes and move slowly up his body, up his legs, heavy over his hips, still across his stomach, warm over his chest, slow down his arms, limp up his neck, soft over his face, smooth. He was entirely encased. He was sealed. He was finished. The point of warmth that was Leo began to dim, not dying, but banking the fire for the night, turning the dial down to the lowest setting, the pilot light of the soul. He was just a rhythmic vibration now, a tiny echo of the great thump of the universe. There was nothing left to see, nothing left to hear, nothing left to feel but the hold. He was ready. The journey was over. The destination was here. And in the center of the warm, heavy, rhythmical dark, Leo stopped drifting. He came to rest. He centered himself in the void. He became the void. And he waited for the final command, the final word that would turn the page from almost asleep to gone. The final goodnight. Leo lay in the center of the heartbeat of the void. He was no longer drifting, for there was nowhere left to go. He was no longer sinking, for he had reached the bottom. He was held in the absolute, motionless center of the deep. The darkness around him was thick, warm, and silent, a protective shell that separated him from everything that had ever happened and everything that would ever happen. The journey was complete. The circle was closed. But before the final curtain of oblivion could fall, the universe had to tidy up. It was time to turn off the lights. It was time to close the doors of the dream world, one by one, sealing the magic away so that the sleeper could rest in pure peace. Far away, in the upper layers of the dream, the plains of white velvet began to fade. The white mist that had cleansed Leo's mind settled into the ground. The landscape folded in on itself, becoming a small, white envelope of silence, which was then tucked away into a drawer of the night. Higher still, the dust mote galaxy ceased its golden dance. The millions of tiny, floating islands drifted to the floor of the belfry. The beam of light that had illuminated them retracted, pulling back through the heavy velvet curtains. The dust settled. The air became still. The galaxy went to sleep. Inside the Velvet Clocktower, the great, soft machinery came to a final halt. The pendulum made of sand stopped at the bottom of its arc. The gears of felt and wool stopped turning. The ribbon of tension was fully unspooled. The clock did not tick. It did not talk. It simply stood there, a silent monument to the end of time, wrapped in shadows and dust. Deeper in the dream, the chamber of suspended time was sealed. The water droplets that hung in the air lost their glimmer as the light faded. The frozen waterfall turned to dark stone. The silvertail birds closed their eyes. The door to the cavern swung shut with a soundless weight, locking the stillness inside forever. The River of Molten Gold cooled. The bright, flowing amber dimmed to a dull, warm bronze, and then to a solid, dark stone. The heat was banked, stored deep within the earth. The current stopped. The golden lotuses folded their petals, extinguishing their small flames. The canyon was dark. The loom of starlight finished its work. The weavers stepped back, their hands of light dissolving into the ether. The great tapestry of the night was complete, covering the cosmos from end to end. The shuttles stopped moving. The hum of the machine faded into a whisper and then into nothing. The archipelago of plush giants drifted into the deep shadow. The giant charcoal islands, the white cotton hills, they all merged with the darkness. The snow stopped falling. The sky turned off. There was no more up or down, only the soft memory of gravity. The tunnel of soft echoes fell silent. The whispers that lived in the walls hushed. The bioluminescent pulse faded to black. The tunnel became just another part of the stone, quiet and empty. The nebula of pastel drifts evaporated. The pink and mint clouds dissolved into the clear, cool night air. The flying bed, which had carried Leo so far, landed softly in the tower. The tower of silent glass grew dark. The glass dome turned opaque, shutting out the stars. The bed was no longer a raft, it was just a bed, a warm, safe place. The library of velvet books slept. The fire in the hearth burned down to the last ember, then winked out. The books on the shelves closed their pages, keeping their stories safe. The leather chair was empty. The smell of old paper and wood smoke lingered in the dark, a scent of comfort. The train of drifting clouds arrived at its final station and powered down. The steam dissipated. The tracks vanished into the mist. The valley of paper lanterns went dark. One by one, the thousands of warm lights flickered and died, leaving only the scent of beeswax and the outline of the mountains. The moonstone cavern ceased its dripping. The water became still. The stones lost their glow. The ocean of midnight ink became still as glass. The whales swam down to the deepest trenches and slept. The garden of sleeping suns dimmed. The fruit on the trees turned dark. The leaves stopped rustling. The crystal shoals stopped chiming. The river of stardust flowed into the sea and vanished. And finally, the blue room on Earth, where it all began, was the only thing left. But even that room was gone now, replaced by the feeling of the duvet, the feeling of the pillow, the feeling of the breath. Leo was alone in the best possible way. The story was over. There were no more words to read, no more sights to see, no more feelings to feel. There was only the heavy weight of his legs, the heavy weight of his arms, the heavy weight of his head. There was only the warmth of the blood, the warmth of the blanket, the warmth of the sleep. There was only the slow breath in, the slow breath out. The heartbeat of the void slowed down one last time. Thump, thump, and then silence. The point of awareness that was Leo flickered. It didn't fight. It surrendered. It accepted the gift of the night. The consciousness spread out, thinning until it was just a layer of peace covering the dark. "Good night, stars," the mind whispered. "Good night, river," the mind whispered. "Good night, Leo," the mind whispered. The final door closed. The lock clicked shut. The key was thrown into the abyss. The world was safe. The boy was asleep. And in the deep, velvet, endless silence, there was nothing left but the rest. Asleep, sleep, sleep. The end.